that must mean that you know, it was fucking awful with Garen Acadian. I didn't watch the last episodes of TSM Legends.
Exactly. That means not only you haven't been keeping up on the soap opera. All right, you got to get the girlfriends round, have a night in. You know,
only watching it when I can see Locodoco. You know.
Oh,
those were
TSM Legends.
that was the best season. That was definitely the best season.
Shit, man.
Locodoco was his role was kind of like Charlie in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He was that kind of a character in TSM.
Which one is Charlie?
He's the one who's like the idiot, basically. He's just like the janitor and goes around helping everyone and stuff. He can barely read and whatnot. But he's
the arena Thorin. The arena Thorin. The arena.
Hilarious. Right, this is going to be episode 78 of Listen Loco. Obviously, it's going to be a European, well, LEC one now. It's not a ULCS anymore. Our guest for this one is YamatoCannon here, coach of Vitality. Also previously coached Splice, Rawcat, used to be a player himself once upon a time. Also, interesting piece of trivia, was deemed by Riot to be toxic. Interesting.
Really?
Not a lot of people know, right, Yamato?
Yeah. Well, actually, my teammates were toxic, and Riot told me on good authority that I was one of the good representatives of the Summoner's Code.
Yes.
That was supposed to cheer me up when my team got banned.
Because the thing is, Loco, Yamato was actually in a team with a player who now you might have known as Incarnation, but he actually wasn't called that back then. He was one of the most toxic players in Europe, remember?
Oh wow. When I think Yamato, I think like deep voice, took shots at me, and generally a nice guy.
Took shots at you.
Yeah,
you mean the Reddit comment?
Well, I'm not sure about if it's the Reddit comment, but it's like from forever ago. I remember it was like, I think like maybe I would guess like 2014, 2015, because I was like, oh, Yamato's coming on. I think he might mention because I remember like we had like a small beef. We didn't really interact, but like you made comments about my coaching on TSM, so I remember it from back then.
Well, hopefully he doesn't bring it up on this episode, Loco. It might get really awkward if you just did it yourself 5 minutes in. What?
I don't think he gives a shit about it. I don't think I give a shit about it. But instead of like just it hanging there, I'd rather call it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really keep it in my mind, but I think in your defense, the fact that TSM, they pretty much broadcast everything that they do, the conversations behind, and you get like nuggets, and this is what you get to judge from. You're also part of the Team Liquid documentary, and just judging based on what I saw from that, you know, it didn't come across as, you know, the best situation.
No, I think that's fair. I guess like the only part I was kind of pissed about is like, you probably know that as a coach, like the piece.
What did he say, by the way? Like, remember the viewers have.
I really don't remember.
Live your life, Loco. You have to give them the details. What did he say?
I don't even remember.
I looked up the clip before we started the show, so it wasn't even that bad. It was like he's like, oh, look at him, like, what does it be? So like, it's like, oh, Turtle, you're doing such a good job. Oh, Dyrus, you're doing such a good job. Oh, Lustboy, you're wording this badly. You're doing such a good job. Like, no wonder TSM's doing so badly. Like when their coach is being like this. So it wasn't even that big of a shot. I just remember it because like I was like, as a fellow coach, like, you know, like that's not everything that the coach does, and like the team generally like tries to show like the positive ends of like what's happening in the team. So like, yeah, that was like the only part I guess I was annoyed by.
Oh, well, this was a long time ago. This was when I was a Rawcat Thorin. This was ages ago, and Locodoco's been dreaming about it. He's been waiting. Episode 78.
No. When Thorin announced the guest, I was like, holy shit, this is it. This is my shot.
Okay. Well, along those lines, Yamato, if we're getting everything out in the open, I've got a question for you. So actually, this is something that me and Veteran addressed on one of those shows I do where it's the call-in show where the elitists on the line where people can call in. What we do is after the second LEC play day, we do a show that's live on Twitch, and then anyone who's in Veteran's chat can basically, if they have an interesting topic, call in, and then they kind of set the topic. And there was one where basically, I forget how this happened, but someone brought up the topic of YamatoCannon. I'm pretty sure this was on that show, not the other one I do. And basically, like, I don't think Veteran's a fan of yours, put it that way. And I'll tell you, by the way, as you can tell by the name of the show, I didn't pick that name by accident. Veteran is an incredibly elitist person, you know. He is someone where it's very easy for him to look at someone he thinks has less knowledge than him in the game, or that usually means thinks about the game differently. And to him, he will be able to easily dismiss that. He'll think, well, who the fuck is this guy? Or even worse, maybe think, oh, he's a pretend coach or something, because that's just, there's a lot of like people in the industry that think this way. They have their own metrics for how they determine people. And I actually, listen, I don't know enough about the game, mate. I can't say whether you're a good coach on the nuts and bolts. I don't know many of your teammates in that sense, so I can't speculate now. But all I said to him basically was, one thing I would say that actually you probably don't get any credit for is the area I think most coaches in esports lack the most is actually having charisma, knowing how to present yourself, knowing how to set a relationship with your players where you actually could inspire them or potentially attenuate someone's motivational issues, etc. That's actually the area in the early days of coaching elite that just didn't exist. Everyone was just a nerd analyst who got given the title coach and was told to just... I mean, to be fair, the owners themselves didn't know what they wanted the coach to do. They just did something. So I made the point to him, think of most of the coaches most of them are still that fucking analyst. Most of them are the guys where if they don't have the right draft, they're worth nothing. If this player decides, fuck you, I'm the star player who has a 2-year contract, you're a cunt and I'm not going to do what you say, well, then they're out of luck. They don't have the skill set to get that guy on side to win him over. So even though to some people, if they're going to hate on you, Yamato, they'll imply that's all you do, is you're just a guy who has a great voice and you can present yourself right. I said you have to give people credit. That is a skill in itself, and that is part of the skill of being a leader, in my opinion.
I think, it was actually, what you're touching on was a big motivation of mine as to why I wanted to become a coach, because I just, at the time when I was a player, the coaches at the time, it was swamp, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this is the standard for what the coach role is. And I think the coach role, when I got the job with Meet Your Makers, Meet Your Mother, or whatever you want to call it, it was a whole disaster story.
Move your mother.
Move your mother. I don't remember these old memes. I remember the time, all the ideas that I took from, because usually I think the biggest difference when you work with esports is that you get to work with players that have never been in a structure that is professional. When you work in traditional sports, you have a kid. Oh, he's 2 years old. He has football shoes on and he starts running, kicks balls, and he does that thing his entire life. And they know what it means to be coached. They know what it means to be a professional. The big difference here is, since the game is always changing, most of the time the players, they just need guidance to be pushed in the right direction. They know a lot about the game. I don't think this is the toughest aspect about being a coach. Sure, I have to keep myself updated. I'm watching everything. I'm playing. I'm making sure that I am in touch with the game. But I think getting this professional kind of essence to gaming house is probably the most difficult part, because you get to work with players that sometimes don't know the idea of responsibility. So I appreciate your comments, Thorin. I appreciate them a lot, because this has been a big focus.
What do you think, though? Because I want to ask this. What do you think on the other angle, though? Because you must notice, like, you have your own haters, like everyone does. Like all of us do. Some of them in the industry, mate. Everyone on this show. There's some people don't like us and think we're shit at what we do or whatever. What do you think about the people who attack, like, the game knowledge side of things?
I think this is something that there's no way in hell they can judge it. There's no way. From an outside, I can't. It's very difficult to judge what a coach knows and what a coach doesn't. But I've been in the shoes of being a professional player. I can identify who is good and who is not very, very fast. As a player, this was my biggest strength. I surrounded myself by players that were better than me, and I kept them together, and I was kind of took the shot caller role within games. And mechanically, I was never something like incredible, whatever, that I was good at. I think when it comes to game knowledge, no one can really judge. I think when it comes to, I think maybe you can judge from my VOD reviews. I think I go pretty in depth when I look at games. I think you can ask any players that I've worked with in the past about their opinion, because I think that could be a good way to gauge it better. Because from an outside, if I have a team and they're making some mistake on stage, or if it's a reoccurring mistake, sometimes the issue is something else. Sometimes there's mental block. Sometimes there is maybe some aspect in game that triggers a response that you don't want. Maybe there is a different issue. The knowledge part of figuring out how to play, I think, is so easy. It's so easy when it comes to League. It's not difficult at all. it is about, I think the biggest challenge when it comes to League is maintaining concentration for 30 minutes, because all these tiny mistakes, being at the wrong place at the wrong time, that is the difficulty. Usually when we review our solo queue games or review our scrim games or review our matches from the LEC, it's very, very straightforward, straight cut, no problem, because, at the level that I'm working at with my players, figuring out how is the best way to play is not hard at all.
Okay. So along those lines, though, one thing I want to say is like that another trend I've noticed, and in this sense, by the way, a lot of coaches are quite similar to fans on Twitter, because actually they have a similar bias. What they do is this: if you say one thing that they consider to be like a basic piece of info, so it could be something like maybe you don't understand the interaction between like a fucking Lee Sin kick and a Sejuani or something like something like semi-obscure, then they'll take that and their logic is, well, since I know that, you must not know everything else I know, which is a very weird way of thinking. Yeah. But like they're always looking for weird cracks like that, even though I can tell you, by the way, it's one thing if people have been on shows and they do that. The people who've never been on shows, try recording yourself talking about any topic in the world. Pick the topic you know the best in the world, record yourself for 20 hours over many different days, different types of hours of how tired you are, what food you had, what happened in your life in that day. And during those 20 hours, you haven't got time to repeat and go, sorry, I made a mistake, then go back. You've got to just speak on the fly, stream of consciousness, keep going. And if at any point in time you ever make a mistake, we'll take that 30-second clip, we'll remove all the rest of it, we'll post that, and we'll all speculate that you know nothing about the game. And that whatever you said there was the height of your knowledge, that every word was perfectly as you wanted it said, as though it was like the fucking Constitution of the United States that people spend hours poring over, and then we'll judge you from that, shall we? Because it's like, all I'll tell you is this: the amount of the shows I've done, like with these call-in shows I do now with Veteran and LS, mate, I can't get people to come on these shows and flame them. Those people who do those flame don't come on shows, mate. And I'll tell you, I even actually got a lot of the Twitter analysts to stop flaming me just by asking them to come on my shows. What happened was, a few of them, I used to say to them, listen, mate, you got a lot of fucking opinions. Why don't you come on Something Insight? Tell you what, all of a sudden, mate, none of them had mics or webcam, things that cost fucking $8 from the local store, or they're too busy, or I think I have to go away next week. Like, every excuse in the book, mate, except to come on the show. Even though, remember, they all imagine in their mind when they're watching that they're going to come on and wreck us all. They're going to run circles around me and Monty and tool us with all their game knowledge. And you know what? They didn't even fucking show up. So I tell you what, it's like that famous quote about the critic. It's like the critic will never be above the man in the arena. The man in the arena, whether he wins or loses, is still fucking competing. The critic's just a guy sat off at the side just going, well, here's my fucking opinion on it or whatever. And before any idiot goes, but that's you and Loco, you idiot. No, we're on a show right now, you idiot. We are in the arena as well. There's a different type of arena. So anyway, what about what I alluded to before? Because I think that would be some interesting info for people. So in the old days, when you were in this team that was toxic, it had two players who've been banned by Riot. It had Nukedoc and it had Jensen, or as I alluded to, he was called Vegar, ex-Vegar or some shit like back then, right? So what were these two guys like? Because obviously later you got to actually coach Nukedoc again. So it's been interesting. What were these guys like way back in the day?
And then on top of that, there's also some guy named Darkwind Jax that people keep mentioning. Could you talk about him also?
Yeah. So, at the time, it's crazy because, we were making a team and, Jensen didn't like me at all. Like Jensen, I was on his list. I was on his Moby Boots, Fizz, Heimerdinger, run it down list, So at the time, I wanted to make a team, wanted to find players, and started with just getting Nukedoc. I played with him in a team, and the transition was that we're supposed to make a team with Wheel Failer and Puju, and they were like, we're going to make a team with different people. So we're like, okay, we're going to go bottom, and we're going to fuck you. We're going to hunt you in tournaments, and we're going to just beat you. So that's exactly what we did. We just grabbed a bunch of players, which happened to be Darkwind Jax, Jensen, and at the time, a guy called El Mupo, which he just didn't belong there at all. He was just this shy guy, too nice guy, and we were just really, really, toxic to each other, but it worked. There was something beautiful about it, and it was fun because we got cleared by Riot, and I remember at the time Jensen and Nukedoc, they are very different from what they are currently, because even I am very different because we were kids back then. Like how old was I? I was fucking, Jesus Christ. It was season 3. I was 17, 18.
Oh wow.
Jesus. Yeah, I was a little shitter, and I remember Nuktak was a super nice guy. He loved the game. Nuktak is still the same. This part of him hasn't changed. What always impressed me about Nuktak is how much he loves the game. He was like, I could be like one day, okay, I'm too tired to play. I want to take a break. He's like, no, no, no. Why would we do anything else? Play League. I love League. I want to learn more. I want to do other things. And
for
Jensen,
people who don't know, by the way, Nukeduck also is like one of those Bjergs and Froggen people who like they would play the game even if they weren't pro. Like they're just like that. Like for example, I told people this story before. I did an interview with Nukeduck. I think it was just after the Rockat period, so it was maybe like towards the end of season 5, so like 2015. So this is now almost half a decade ago. And in it, because he'd been through all those rough years where he had the NIP thing where he could never get back into LCS, and he came to Rockat and it didn't work out the way he hoped. In the interview, I sort of implied, like, in light of being banned and all these tough years, like, are you just going to play for 1 or 2 more years? And I forget the wording, but he basically said in the interview something along the lines of like, I might just play for like half a decade more. And he obviously has. Yeah. He actually did do it. Like, this is a guy who legit, he had never had any plans to quit playing League as long as League was a thing.
Dude, for me, like, even watching League gets boring now, time to day. I can't imagine, like, still playing, like, 10 to 12 hours a day.
I've got bad news for you, mate. I've got bad news for you. First of all, you are watching LCS, so I can forgive that. But if you actually are bored watching the game, mate, it's probably not the thing for you. Because I'm not exaggerating. I will never, ever get bored watching top Counter-Strike matches. I'll watch the same 2 teams play. Like, if they're at a really high level, I could watch them play for 100 years, mate. I never get bored.
I think I'm not sure if you would feel the same if Counter-Strike had, like, a season that was, like, almost, like, 9 months long and consistently, like, you would also have to watch, like, top team versus shitter team. Like, I love League when the tournaments were very, like, when we didn't have LCS and it was tournament by tournament. I thought it was really exciting. And the level of play was lower, but in a sense, like, the level of play was at least a little bit more leveled. So where it wasn't just like Korea's really good, China's really good, and then NA is garbage. I'm not sure if you would have, I'm not sure if you'd have the same reply if Counter-Strike also followed like the League format.
Sure. By the way, I even say, and I've made it part of my persona, I even say in CSGO when some no-name team qualifies to the event, I even say I don't watch anything except Tier 1 Counter-Strike. I don't know who the fuck this team is. We'll all find out during the tournament. It's almost like part of my... It's good. It's a pretty clever way to not have to do the research for that team, by the way. But it's also the most worthless research to do. They're probably going to go straight out of the tournament, aren't they? So I just make it like they're beneath me, basically, and they have to work their way into my good graces. You know? Anyway, go back to the story. Yeah, go on.
I wanted to, like, I would summarize Jensen and Darkwing Jack. You know, when you got to know them and you got to be friends with them and you got to spend a lot of time with them, they are more loyal than anyone else that I ever worked with at the time. They are very, very good to their friends. But like they're very, very mean to. They're very mean to very mean to other people. Sure. But that was, you know, there was something funny about it. You know, whether people like enjoy it or not, I don't give a shit saying that. It was, you know, as long as it wasn't really like racial, really fucked up, then it was the flame. It was part of the culture that was part of online gaming. People would just say, oh, you fucking suck, and just run it down. You know, it was a part of the experience. And maybe it's because I was part of, like I was in it for a very long time, so I was very thick-skinned. I was aware of it, but after the phase of playing with them in a team, the relationship was very, very strong and very, very good. Like my favorite memory, we bootcamped before we got banned. It was the day before. What they did was like we were like in a net cafe, you know, and during night it was just we could do whatever the fuck we wanted, like Jack candy and shit from the store or whatever, and we played Guitar Hero. So I was playing Guitar Hero, and they logged in on every single PC on their banned accounts. So on every PC it said you're banned till 2164 or whatever permaban was at the time. And they were like, "Hey Yamato, we're banned, dude." And I was like, no, you're fucking. You know, I just had the call. We're Riot. We're not banned. No way. And then like I walk in the room and every PC is banned, and they look at me. I get so fucking pissed, and I'm about to punch something, and I just hit Darkwing Jack's giggling like Peter Griffin or some shit, you know. And at this moment, I remember it so clearly because after that joke happened, I was like, okay, no way in hell, nothing's gonna happen to us. We're good. And then the next day, boom, my dear, don't come to the event. You're not allowed to come to the event. Just you're banned. And what's funny, you know, they banned the third guy. El Mupo, the guy who I said is super shy, super nice, he would not hurt a fly, you know? They just banned a third guy, so we couldn't like pick up some random people to just play the event. Because at the time, the rules were so shit. Like you could just pick people in the crowd. I'm like, yeah, I want Thorin, Locodoco, come up here. We're going to play the tournament. Welcome to my team, Team Solomid. You know?
Wait, didn't Fnatic literally do that at Worlds with Pushu, where they were like, "Oh, we don't have who was it that they had?" Like I remember them doing something.
No. You got that the wrong way around, Loco. What happened was during the season, the split itself, N-rated was kicked and they got Pushu, but it wasn't at Worlds.
Okay.
Like that was well before that. Like it'd be pretty crazy if they were just like, "You in the crowd, oh, and you're actually good. Fuck, well, let's see how far we can go then." Like, no, it wasn't that ridiculous.
I remember it was that like ESLS stuff where NA teams would like, or it was European teams where they would make a post like, "Hey, whoever's at this event, if you're past like D1 or if you're past like this elo, please let us know because we need a sub." I do remember like what Yamato was saying, like at random ass tournaments.
That happened though. Yeah, that was. I remember I was asked, but I was like 15, and they were like, "Can you travel?" I'm like, "No, shit, man, no, I can't. I don't know how to travel." 15, so it was pretty fucked up. But yeah, that definitely happened. Like, oh, this guy can't come because he has an exam, so we need another player. Some shit.
He can't play on Saturdays. His mom doesn't allow it.
Yeah.
I remember those days.
Sure.
Okay, so let's dive into actually some of the stuff about. The funny thing is though, actually, you know, Loco, you actually are both in exactly the same boat then, as I mentioned with that criticism there, because that's actually basically what happens to you, mate. It's like it doesn't matter what you did in your career as a coach. The people who hate on you will always just claim that you don't have any game knowledge and then pick something you said that they don't like, and then that just completes it in their mind. You should be able to empathize with him in that regard.
I am sure. I mean, I empathize with all coaches, and I try not to judge coaches unless I know it personally or I heard personally from players.
I'm just saying, veteran and LSR coaches. So
we can. That's a discussion for another day.
I'm probably the only person ever who like works with all these people as like they're my co-hosts, but then I also kind of like, it's kind of like if an old school dad back in the days when these big estates, it's kind of, I want like the kids to like battle each other for my affection, and in doing so I hope that whoever emerges the victor will be like the one worthy of inheriting my title, because I don't want just a bunch of punk kids, I want to see, let's have a bit of warfare,
Well, on that front, some of the shows aren't doing as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, he said it, not me. So, I'm doing pretty well on my part. So, not calling me out.
You're a common denominator. You're a common denominator. There are unique aspects to each show.
Indeed, there are, yes. But anyway, so let's jump in the LEC. So let's start here. So, Yamato, we've also picked the best time to bring you on this show. Because if you'd have come on any time from week 1 to week 5, it was all flame, mate. Even in spring, when you all fell off, listen, you know how I am, mate. I just said it straight over your face. I said it as well.
I appreciate that.
As soon as you guys fell off in spring, I did just think a lot of the shit they were doing, I thought was kind of gambly anyway. It didn't make sense to me. It's like people figured them out. They're done. It's over for this team, as it should be. It felt right. Like if you're someone who, like I'll tell you, I to be fair, coming from knowing people like Monty, I am a bit of a purist. Like I like teams that are like very, like basically, here's my bias, right? To me, when Origin loses now, even though they're losing for reasons that perfectly make sense, I kind of feel like they shouldn't, because I have a bias to teams I think are intelligent and that the players, have a high level of game understanding. So I will, in the same sense as it takes me longer to accept that they're losing, it takes me longer to give credit to a team I feel like's a bit gimmicky that wins, if you know what I mean. So in light of the fact that everyone thought Vitality was done, what was Vitality in the first place doing well that made you a good team, and then kind of how's it developed from there? Like what did we not see from the outside that was making you guys win?
I think in the beginning of Spring Split, I think there was a sense of confidence that the players had that was very contagious. They had this idea that they are truly the greatest, And that idea is hard to plant in some players. Some players are very logical. They're playing against a team that is better than them, and they are going to know in the back of their mind that they are going to lose. And I think that inherently hurts you. This is something that I have learned these past 2 years, that the idea that you are the greatest can be a great force. So this was a very, very big positive from the get-go. And I love working with players that are just, when they open the doors and all of a sudden this new environment, they're joining the LEC, and they are just coming in as sponges almost. They are ready to really take these ideas that you have about the game and really grab them. And at the time, my philosophy about the game was always that we want to strive for perfection. Strive for perfection, which is sometimes ironic with the way we play, because sometimes it was like we just a dive looks like awful shit, and then the game just falls apart. But in some cases, there were many games where those dives worked, and we review those cases and we see, okay, if we did this better, if you mechanically played this better in a perfect scenario, and if everyone plays perfect, this play still works. And these are the limits that we always try to breach, because we didn't want to be the team that, okay, the meta right now is every team kind of sucks right now, so we just pick late game and we follow the trend. This is not going to push us to be the team that is going to beat the Chinese teams or the Korean teams at the World Championship. It's not going to push us to become anything greater than what Splice is or what Schalke is. My idea is always we strive for perfection, and you need to kind of find your way through that chaos. And everyone at the time, all of my players, we agreed with this fundamental idea. So we started off with playing the Jace and the Ryze, and everyone was very, very bold in their approach. Everyone was willing to really commit themselves to this idea of striving for perfection. And at the time, the meta fit perfectly for it. I had Cabochard, I had Jizuke. They were pretty much playing the solo lanes, and we were ahead of the curve because we were just playing around the 2v2 mid. Like, Europe had no idea what was going on. They didn't know how to play around the 2v2 mid. I remember Fnatic's biggest issue was that they just didn't know how to play around caps. And this is something that they changed, and eventually they became the monster.
It's probably also a good thing for you guys that so many people changed their mid lane of that split.
Yeah.
They were starting from zero with that chemistry, right?
For sure, yeah. That's fair as well. And we had this edge of understanding that we can play through mid and we can do these dives onto bottom and top. And this was something that right now, today, this is nothing new. This is very common. And this is something that we did very, very well. And most of our losses came from just misunderstanding. There's this meme about Gilius Baron. This was a real problem of ours, So we mastered the early game. That was a big part of our success. And our downfall was we were trying to replicate the same recipe over and over, and we underestimated, this idea of, we are confident, we are strong, we're going to be the greatest. It reached a point where it made us blind to what we are. It made us blind to our issues. We always thought that, okay, we can conquer our problems. We can draft in a way that is very, very risky, and we can come out ahead. But this just didn't work in the long run. So the approach we've been taking this split is more of the start from the basics and then add from there, because we really literally had to start from zero. Week 1, week 2 in China, we just got stomped over and over and over again. And the biggest struggle was to instill this idea to the players that we are shit, what are we going to do about it, And then we made the plan about just making it as simple as possible, and we worked from there, which is very different from the fundamental approach from last year. Okay. But the idea is that still we're going to try to reach that point. And I think the wildness is starting to come to life once again now in week 8.
Okay, right, let's talk a bit about that then, because that's one of the things is from the outside, that's what people used to say to dismiss Vitality. They said all they do is just try and draft 3 winning lanes. They tell the jungler to just 24/7 invade, attack the other team, like just fuck with them. They're trying to just go through, get a kill onto one of the solo laners, and then they hope they just snowball the whole game from there, right? That's easy to say. That's like one of those things where a fan writes like step 1, step 2, question mark, profit. It's like the old meme, But I tell you what, there's plenty of teams in the LCS can't do that. They wouldn't win games as many as Vitality did. So there's clearly something behind what you were doing, right?
Oh, it's difficult. It's the most difficult way to play. The metaphor I always use with my players is, if we are drafting early game, we have a gun with 1 bullet. If you miss your 1 bullet and you have to aim for the opponent's head, then the guy has a gun with infinite bullets. And what you need to hope for is that he shoots himself in the head, you know? Because that's the only way you're going to win. That's the only way you're going to win, you know? Yeah. It's like you reach that point in the game, you're behind with the early game comp, and you're like, okay, we're going to set up for the opponent's mistake, right? And if the opponent plays perfect, we are not going to be in a winning position. That's okay sometimes because people don't play perfect. But there is a great advantage, I believe, when you're at a very high level to be the one that starts with the gun, you know? And I think, you know, this idea, I got it initially from Koma. Horo told me that, he said, I asked him, how does Koma draft? What does he think? He's like, does he draft compositions? What is he thinking? He's like, no. Peak winning lane, this is composition. Composition comes after. And this idea I've stuck with for a very long time because it still rings true to this day. If you don't have winning lanes, you're just going to be one of those shitter teams that's going to wait for 30 minutes and then, you know, win. But I think the LEC has very little of those teams right now, so I'm also happy about that.
That's funny because that's exactly what SKT was. Sometimes they didn't have the greatest early game, but they always relied on team fighting strength along with the bang faker days to like carry the team, like despite the early game being shitty, like because they had some weak jungle. Go ahead.
This was season 3 SKT, season 2 SKT. Okay. You know, this was very, very early days. I was working with Horo back in actually SKT season
It should have been
4.
season 4 because in season 3 SKT only had one team and the other team was the Reaper team.
I'm trying to think when Horo worked with SKT.
Yeah, it would be SKT, right?
He was with Reaper then.
Yeah, it was 2014. Oh, he's with Reaper as well.
Yeah.
I think he was briefly in a team with them. Yeah.
I just have this clear memory of SKT playing 5th game in a best of 5, and what they blind pick was straight up just Kalista, Thresh, LeBlanc, and then the strongest jungler.
Has to
in
be
the game
season
at the
4
time.
then, because Kalista came out in season 4, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know the timeline exactly, but this was a great inspiration of mine, and I think what were we talking about? I'm too tired.
Anyway, Loco, what do you think then? Because obviously, one of the interesting things about the meta is people do try to predict where it's going to go and where they should go. So, like, if you went back a couple of years ago, people used to talk about the fact that, like people used to always criticize me because a lot of my favorite players are amazing laners. They would always be like, who gives a fuck about the lane? Everyone's going to farm all right, and unless you lose too many kills, it's going to let you get into a team fight later anyway, and you're going to make rap rotations. So stop focusing on the lane so much. But if you see in the last few years, especially with where obviously like you have all these super powerful solo laners, it fucking matters how many kills go on the top laner in the first 10 minutes. Like, that isn't just some joke that you're going to avoid because everyone's going to build tank anyway and end up with 4 items in a team fight. No, if you can get that top laner 1 or 2 kills up, that could be the beginning of you win the whole game.
So
what do you think?
What I think on like the whole early game meta stuff and like
what do you think of and his approach to it there, where this is like his philosophy to how Vitality would play it?
Well, yeah, I mean, as he said, it's a very high risk, high reward. Like, you get to have initiative, you get to have priority. Like, but if you fuck up, if you fumble, then it can look really bad. So, I mean, even some of the games Vitality played like recently when they're in drafting, like their comp is like Corki, Karma, Lee Sin. It's very low CC and a lot of priority, and they have to invade consistently. Like, they have to get their early game going, or this is a comp like that's not going to team fight as well. That's not as stable. Like, it's it comes with a lot of risk. Like, personally for me, like, I stayed away from comps like that, and also it's also very dependent on like the players you have. If you have players that can't execute that, like, then it's extremely hard comp to play, and it's not a comp that gives you consistent high win rate unless you are like on top of things mechanically, like consistently throughout.
I think maybe the Karma comp is not the greatest example because Karma Corki, you always have a leg to fall back on, you know. If you
give us an example.
Corki.
What's to you in your mind? What's a classic Vitality comp? Give us an example. Like if the draft went well and you got what you wanted, what would be the kind of comp you'd be playing?
I think the classic in the good old days. I should say good old days. It was just natural that it came out that way. But back in Spring Split last year, for example, we would have Jace, Ryze, and then maybe like a Gragas, some shit, a Jarvan, and then like straight up just trash Draven. It's like, okay, every lane wins, and then we snowball one lane until he says, okay, I can 1v2 now, you can go to a different lane. And this fucking worked, you know? And the most important detail of this was that we had to use Prio to pressure the enemy jungler. Our goal was always pressure enemy jungler, and he doesn't impact anyone. You know?
Yes.
And if we have 3 winning lanes and all lanes need to play like animals, you know, then if we keep track of the enemy jungler, then the goal, like the game, will be in our hands. And then turret plating got added to the game, so that was a big blessing. Made the playstyle even better. But now, you know, the difference to our approach now is that, you know, at the beginning of the split, if we are 0-4 and it's like, guys, we're gonna fucking pick all these difficult lanes, difficult comps, and we're going to try to play perfect, it's not gonna work, because our scrims was like, okay, the game is also 3 minutes. It's just a waste of time. We had to just accept that we are shit, and we just had to start over completely. Start over from scratch. We were playing those boring comps that scaled in the game, play into one lane, the other one is scaling, and so forth. The basic kind of macro idea that most teams kind of attest to, and we are building from there. Because I think the best teams in the world are always going to be the ones that just take initiative, push. We saw it at the World Championship last year with IG. They were relentless in their approach. They picked very, very strong lanes. They trusted Ning to carry the early game, and then many times he looked like a 30-2 because he has to play perfect. The jungler needs to be absolutely perfect, because otherwise it doesn't work. And that's why I think Ning is considered either a big inter or he's a big
Yes.
smurfer, because there's no balance at all if you are trying to reach that perfection.
Yeah. They're actually a good example, by the way, of a team where, like, this is something I sometimes do in my game, Counter-Strike, whenever I'm like an analyst on the desk. So the best player in Counter-Strike is a player called Simple, and he's not just the best. Like, you can be the best and be someone with an all-around game or very polished and, you know, conservative. He's the best, and he takes like the most aggressive angles with the highest mechanical skill. And so basically, we always tell people as a joke, like, if you were a fan, don't ever try and play like that. Like, odds are you will ruin your game completely. You'll be in the lowest rank. You'll be the cunt feeding, basically. Like, you'll just be throwing it because you'll be taking all these high risk. What for you will be a high risk, low reward because you won't have the execution to do it. Like, that's what IG is as an entire team. Like, even some of the comps I've seen them run. Now, the fan who watches it wouldn't realize this because the game ended at 22 minutes or was way over before that in terms of them having 1 million kills. But I've seen them run comps that, like, couldn't even team fight. Like, it's all just people who were supposed to smash the lane and it's just pure mechanics shit. Like, they would have had no utility whatsoever in the team fight. They have no tank, obviously. Like, they've done some crazy, like, run the knife edge type comps that basically, like you're saying, the degree of execution is massive, and you basically have to do it because in this scenario, if the team that survives is the team with, like, a tanky top laner, you're going to have a fucking nightmare in those team fights. Like, good luck at that point in time if you aren't way ahead. But actually, that's something I want to ask about, because that's another thing that's very underrated, is to even coach players to be able to play the kind of comps you were describing before, where you know you've got a time limit on them. Like, I've noticed in history of League, it's generally the opposite, especially in playoff scenarios. People would prefer to be on the other side of that coin. They'd rather have the comp that gives a little bit up early, but is going to scale because it has the opposite effect on your mind. You have the safety blanket, right? If I can just survive the next few minutes, okay, I'm down a kill, but that doesn't matter. My champion comes online at 30 minutes. That's when I'm going to get back in the game. Okay, we've lost a few CS, but it's all right. Just sit. Like, you can always reassure yourself if you've got that comp. If you got the one that you've got, but like that's a lot of pressure on people. I know plenty of people who, like, I've told stories before, some of the teams that are amazing at snowballing the game in scrims, and then they go on stage and wonder why they don't do it. Well, because you feel differently. You got all the cameras on you. You know, if you fuck up, everyone's watching this. There's no, hey, go again in the scrim. Like, that scrim gets played out, mate. So it must be difficult to get everyone on the same page mentally in that sense.
I think, you know, in history, like in the past, I think it made more sense to take the safer approach because no one was good enough to play at that level. G2 dominated Europe for a very long time, not through sheer aggression in the early game. They reached the conclusion that if they are better in mid to late game, then they're going to be the better team. And the opposition at the time was pretty much my team and Splice. And our approach with the team was we were trying to play the same pattern in the game at all times. We were playing 1-3-1 no matter what in every single game, and that's what we drafted towards. And that was our mentality back then. And G2, you know, G2, the team at the time, was considered really insane. No one was close to Europe. But if I would slot them into current day and age, they would just get rolled over by the pace everyone's taking. I think in a couple of years, as the game progresses, is going to come down to whoever gets that 10 CS lead. If someone gets a 10 CS lead in a matchup, all of a sudden the team that has that lead is going to snowball that out of control, and they're going to take the game and run away with it. I think this is where, as everyone's going to become better, the average player becomes better. This is what we are going to strive towards, which is the idea of what I believe is the perfect game. When you are taking that initiative from step one and you don't make any mistakes. I think eventually we're going to have many, many teams. We see it in G2, for example. I think G2, while in regular season, I don't think they look too scary. I think in best of 5 scenarios, when they really, really turn it on and they know the stakes of the game and they know this is it, then they look like a really, really dangerous. They try to pressure every single advantage. Like the 2 best of 5s they play against OG was a fantastic display of just never letting it go of anything. And the best of 5 against SKT was also a fantastic display. Even Team Liquid series was even the perfect display of it, where they just took everything away from it. They made Team Liquid go home hungry, tired and thirsty, everything, destroyed them. And I think more and more teams are going to show up taking shape like this. And I think as the game progresses, becomes much older, this is what it's going to become. I'm curious in terms of CSGO. Teams in the past, was it the strategic teams that were better? And right now, is there a progression where the shooters are the better players?
The interesting thing is, at the moment, the best team in the world in CSGO is maybe the first team ever where, no joke, every player, like in theory, could be a star player. Like there's been teams that maybe had 4 like that or 3 like that, but not only do they have all 5, but the key reason they're able to make it work is a bunch of them have overlap in the roles they can play in the game. So their logic, which is kind of genius, if you had a team like it's basically like having a G2 team in that sense. Like no one else has the players to do this plan anyway. Yeah. Basically, the logic is, well, let's say me and you both play a similar role, and in a normal team, I'd probably be set up as the star player and get all the resources. Well, imagine I'm having an off day. This isn't my best map. What if you could then take over in that sense and I could just play your role? That would be the perfect team in a sense. So at the moment, they're actually like revolutionizing the game. But the thing with CS is, because we don't get the radical shifts, like there's nothing equivalent to changing the jungle or reworking a chapter. You slightly tweak the weapons. Instead, when you have a long game state that's fairly similar, it tends to be like you go through like a cyclical one. So, for example, if you go years and years back, the first great team in CSGO was all the fraggers. It was NIP. But then after that, you got teams where it was like halfway between. So I'd say like teams like Fnatic was more like they have a game plan, and then within that, the players have some autonomy. But then, for example, last year, the best team was the most tactical team we've ever seen. They played some very rigid stuff, but it was the best. And the idea was they had to execute perfectly, but they did. And so to me, it's more like I actually think one of the reasons why, this is why it's different for games where the developer changes it, because you don't have a choice as to what's coming next, basically. But in games where the game state's very similar, I even think part of it is actually based on how you recruit. Because what happens is whoever the team is who's number 1 now, who's beating you, you probably look at what the difference is between you and them, and that's what your recruitment tries to make up. So if their team, for example, like the Team Liquid team now, is just their fragging's too good, they just get more kills than you in the server, odds are when you go to replace a player, you're probably going to try and get a player who's a really high fragger, as opposed to in a different era, maybe you would have chosen a more tactical player to give yourself a different style. So I think the games are different. There's similarities in that respect, but I would say for League of Legends, if you look at some of these teams, G2 is a good example, they are doing something more akin to the example I've seen some people give, it's a pretty good one from sports, is like the classic total football approach of Johan Cruyff, where he played for this Ajax team, and I think it was the 70s. And basically, they had a style of play which he took into coaching, and it's actually what started Barcelona to becoming like a truly great team in the modern era, where his style of team was he would even recruit wingers and attacking midfielders, and he'd put them as like the left back, which is a defensive position in soccer. So what he would do is his logic would be, if you even get the ball as a left back, you're going to like kick it up or run forwards in the pitch, and attack starts from the first line of defense. And so his whole approach literally, which is somewhat akin to something like some of these teams now, was like, the reason we're going to win is because we're going to create so many chances, it's going to overwhelm the opponent, and if he scores 4 because we don't have a traditional defense, doesn't matter, we scored 6. Now that is totally like that turned football on its head, because in fact football traditionally, a lot of the greatest teams, this is typified by the Italian teams, their mentality is you score one goal, then you put everyone behind the ball and you defend and you win 1-0. That's a perfect game to them. So if you want the League of Legends equivalent, Monty's favourite game ever, which he only said is his favourite to be an arsehole because it fit the principle he wanted to make. His favourite game ever is this game that like Jin Air Green Wings played against someone years ago, where it was like a 60-minute game. I think there was something like 1 or 2 kills, and it was just one team gradually took all the towers and slowly won the game in like the most boring fashion ever. But to Monty, that was perfect because it was like, you know, no mistakes were made. You won every opportunity. Yours is the opposite, basically. You're saying, like, if you crack a hole in the beginning of the game, you get a crowbar and you open that fucking thing wide open and you win the whole game off it. So it's a different world we're in now in philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, the perfect game used to be, like, you get perfect vision and then you take only team fights that you need to, and it used to be rotations. But, like, as you said, it's different from CSGO and soccer because we have, like, changes that are made into the game. Like, vision gets taken away, like, turret plating gets added, like, solo laners get buffed, so... But I think that's very true. Like, the idea of perfect game changed so much from no fight to always fighting and taking the first initiative and snowballing from that.
I think with the analogy of football, I think just because of, like, if the analogy of football would make sense, I think it would be like, let's say the team that scores 3 goals first would win, because there's no time limit to a game of League of Legends. CSGO, there's the rounds, etc.
Well, the other part to add to that, just for context, is like there's what's different about a football game, isn't it? Even if you've scored 4 goals, if in theory I play amazing in the last 5 minutes, I could still score 4 goals as well. The difference is in League, because of the way, like if you get the early kills and gold, you convert that into items, which give you better stats, which means it's the equivalent to if you score 4 goals and at the end of the game your keeper's 3 times bigger, and now it's even harder for me to score. You know? Like that, like it's true. League in that sense, if it wasn't for the vision control aspects, it would have never made sense to actually play so defensive.
Because, you know, I think the biggest thing is, for me, when I think of the perfect game, is there was once, like in the past, you had the conversations like, oh, this guy is a great tank. That was like, oh, this is his quality. He plays tanks, he locks in tanks, he's great at tanks. Now, if you say that about the player, he's just, there's no longer like...
Oh, wait a second, your mic's cutting out a little bit. Are you a bit too far away or something?
Hello.
That's better. I check if 1 second on Discord. Do you have that setting where it like cuts off after a certain threshold?
Maybe. I'll just try not to move. I'm too theatrical.
Oh, that's okay. I'll tell you if it happens again anyway. What did you say? If someone says a tank player, then he's what? He's a shit player, I assume?
It's an insult.
So in the past, so right now, we're reaching the point in time where, you know, you look at the player in G2, you don't say, oh, he has champion pool issues, he can only play this. It doesn't exist. They're playing what they consider are the best champion.
They even play stuff now, Yamato, believe it or not. They don't even know how to play and give free wins. Crazy, isn't it?
Sure.
We should definitely talk about that game.
We will.
And I think, you know, eventually, I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, because I don't know too much about CSGO, but I imagine if there is a tactical team that is going to beat Team Liquid and take the throne again, I think there's going to be a team down the line that have the best shooters, that is also the best tactically, because you try to cover all ground, right?
Yeah, the two worlds, yeah, of course.
And now what I'm saying, perfect game, start from the get-go, start from level 1, you try to take an advantage from there. It doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, we don't care about vision, we don't care about teamfight, we don't care about macro. That's not the case. It's more about just mastering every part of the game. And I think the early game was the part that was squeezed the least in the past because of the risk factor. And the risk factor can be removed if you practice it, because in the end, League of Legends is just a bunch of variables. It's not very little randomness in League of Legends comparison to these, or I don't know if you esports, whatever. There's crit and then there's klepto, I guess. Other than that, all variables are controlled and you can calculate most situations. Review situations, you can calculate them. And I just believe that early game, just because it starts from there, you can get, if you have a better early game, you have an advantage, you can transition that into a good mid game, into a good late game. And it's not at all to neglect good vision, neglect a macro, neglect good play, good Baron preparation. I'm not neglecting this at all, because this in my mind still is a part of the perfect game. I just believe that it starts from minute 1, and if you have the initiative, it means that you can do great things. No?
Yamato, is this game theory unique to the current meta and unique to the current game like patch? Or if you could go back in time, let's say like 2 to 3 years, where support still had Sightstone, where junglers still had the green smite, and also AD carry items were still strong, would you still hold this belief in terms of how the game should be played?
I don't think, I need to make the distinction. Is just I don't believe I've gone into too much detail about how I believe the game is supposed to be played. Simply put, my catchphrase would be, we're trying to squeeze every fucking penny. We're trying to squeeze every fucking, if it's an orange, we're just trying to get out all that juice, And I think the early game is the trickiest part. I think a mid to late game, usually how you're supposed to be playing the game can be summarized in 2 sentences. Or you're supposed to, you don't have vision here, you're supposed to group around mid lane, push out here, and then you create a slow push on this side, move it to this side, and then you, and so forth. It can be explained very, very simply, while the early game is much more complicated and has a lot more risk to it. Well, sure, you can lose the game in the late game. We've done that many times. I'm saying that doesn't happen either, but I just believe that in any sport, in any game, you're trying
Vitality Spring Split, second game against G2.
Same game. Oh, what disaster was that?
The second game you played against G2 in the Spring Split was the one where you had the massive lead and you just one of the throws of all time.
Holy shit.
You remember this one? It was right towards the end of the split. No, you lost this game at the end.
Oh, let me think.
It's a bad one. I'll link you.
Memory lane. Link it, please.
It's a fucking bad one, mate.
Probably.
It's just an example of what not to do if you have a massive lead, basically.
Yes, probably. And I pride myself in being able to get those leads, because I think that's the difficult part. Everyone says, oh, these fucking guys, they just entered the game, which is true. That's fine, But I think the difficult part is still getting that lead, because we're the one pointing guns at G2 and we just happen to do this, Which, of course, is a problem in itself.
This game, see if you remember this scoreboard, mate, when you bring it up. Just look at the gold, look at the number of kills, and ask yourself, 39-minute game? Why didn't you win this one?
Cabo solo killed. Oh, no.
Yeah, this is a bad one. This is a bad one.
Oh, yeah, this was a disaster. Yeah,
you had them banged to rights. You had them completely banged to rights. They should have lost this game on paper.
Yeah. Holy, Cabo outplayed Wunder so fucking hard. It was crazy. We lost the shit. This is similar to the Splice game we had. Jesus Christ. I was explaining, my doorman always asks me, he's like, what happened today? Did you play a match? I'm like, yeah. Today what happened was the equivalent. We were 5-0 in a football match and we lost. Because that's what happened against Splice. And this G2 game was one of those as well.
Indeed. Okay, what about that then? What do you... Since we were asking about the team setup and the style, like one of the things I personally have as a philosophy is I think every coach, no matter what style they prefer to run and what their philosophy in the game is, in my opinion, whenever you arrive at a team, unless you are the general manager as well and can fire and bring in new players, which not a lot of people can, you have to actually be realistic. Look at your personnel and then say, based on the people I have in my team, what would be the most effective style for us to play? Not like what I would like to play in my mind. And because, for example, if I come to a team, I'll give you a very extreme example here. Let's say I was someone who actually had the same mentality a lot of people currently do, which is let's play around strong solo laners. Let's be very aggressive early in the game. If I arrive at Royal Never Give Up, and that's my philosophy, it's probably a waste of everyone's fucking time. I've got Uzi I. Like, what would the point in not playing around Uzi I be? What would the point in telling him to just play some shit? Let's just hold the bot lane, and then I'm going to play through what last year used to be a tank jungler, a tank top laner, and let me, right? That wouldn't make sense on paper. So if you arrive at a team and you have Cabashard as your top laner, who, by the way, a lot of people I thought made a very credible case should have been the MVP of the spring split. If you look at his team, you look at the other teams and who the other candidates were, he probably was the person who was doing the most for his team of all those players in that pool. Looked like an incredible player. So if I arrive and I have a player like Cabashard, I'm going to find ways to make him my best player, right? How have you tried to use him in your team?
I think it's incredible to work with Cabashard. I think he is truly what a veteran is supposed to be by any stretch of the imagination. Really, really wonderful to work with. I can use him in a way as he serves as an example. He serves as a leader. I see him, like I can tell him, for example, oh, this guy, he is off today, a bit extra, and he takes that with him in game, and he keeps track of everyone, you know, and that's incredible considering from an outside perspective, if we only look at his gameplay, he's amazing mechanically, and now he's working on his leadership skills, is what he's developing better, which is amazing, by the way. But when I joined Vitality, I had this mentality in my mind, okay, I'm going to work with the roster they had, and I'm going to see who actually fits in the mold that I have in my mind. Because I worked in Splice, and we had a lot of limitations. We couldn't play the game that I wanted to play at all. We figured out a way. We were basically abusing the shit out of lane swap meta. We mastered the lane swap meta, and we won a lot of games because of people didn't understand it. We avoided our weakness, and that's kind of a band-aid solution, because when we went to the World Championship and we had Samsung, RNG, and TSM in our group, we just got destroyed. So I never wanted to experience that again, where we go into the World Championship, we just have a bunch of band-aid solutions. We're screaming against Flash Wolves, and they're actually doing things, 2, 3, 4, and we're just getting destroyed. So I just wanted to avoid this. I am very willing to join a team and see, okay, this is what we're capable of, and I need to be realistic, right? And I need to make sure everyone feels confident and comfortable with themselves. But sometimes you need to kind of create this imagination for the players that even though I have a player that plays only 2 champions, make them believe that this is ideal, this is good.
Sure.
You know? So when I joined Vitality, I started off by just testing all the players. I was like, okay, who really do I imagine myself becoming the best player in their position? You know, that has to be in my trajectory, and Kabashar fit that trajectory perfectly. I could easily imagine at the time that he could be one of the best players in the position, and this is the type of players that I try to always bring into my team. When I can imagine for myself as a gut feeling and also kind of thought process that I can't really explain, I try to just get players that I believe, can you be the best player in your position? Otherwise, it's just not interesting to work with you. I had an option to, you know, either get the guys, Jizuke, Jack Troll, and Attila.
The guys from Giants, yeah.
Yeah, I had the option to take them or a bunch of veterans that, you know, are just like...
Just washed up people and recycled them, like, imagine, yeah.
It's like, okay, they're going to, we're going to go playoffs, we're going to lose, and that's it, you know? I can't imagine doing more than, you know, they've been tapped out. They're just in the LEC at this point because they've stuck around for a long time, and a lot of the teams are just protecting their investment, you know? So for me, I need to have this idea in my imagination, okay, this guy can become potentially a best player in his position. And I think my assessment has been fairly accurate, because if you look at the players that I've worked with in the past, they are still in the league, you know? I brought Mickey to Splice. People wanted me to kick Wunder, people wanted me to kick Kobe, Jonas as well, and Senkox at the time, you know, we were on relegation. People were calling for heads, people calling for my head, which is fine. And I had full faith in their ability to grow and potentially become one of the best in the position. And I think...
It is funny, you know, because by the way, Loco, here's what's hilarious, right? This is the lineup of the Splice team he's talking about, the one from Worlds. So they had Wunder, who's in G2 now, was literally called by Papa Smithy a few months ago, best Western player in the whole world. They had Cold, who at the time was called Trashy, who obviously is in Origin now. Sure, Origin's not doing well, but again, was highly rated at the end of last split. Mid laner was Senkox, who actually is the only one who isn't in LEC.
Probably the least attractive out of the 5, yeah.
At the time, by the way, he was the star player. Everyone in Europe was hyping him as the best player in the team. The bot lane was Kobe, who literally all the LEC people on the broadcast voted best ADC of the spring. And then the support was Mickey X, who's in G2 now. So, like, actually, if he'd have known back then and someone could have signed this, like, the amount of talent was unbelievable.
I mean,
pretty good.
They would have been extremely cheap too, because like it's before they really accomplish anything. I think that one World run they had is like their first anything. So yeah, keeping that group together would have gave Splice a really strong backbone to build off of for years to come.
And this, like, this is the one thing I pride myself the most on as a player as well. I managed to surround myself with players that were really, really good. Darkwing Jax, even though he got permabanned, was really, really fucking insane. Like he's the type of guy that if you piss him off in the right way, he would just. It was like Jensen was teasing him because he was low ranked, and he's like, okay, fuck you, and then he just took rank 1 in 1 week, just like, you know. And rank 1 actually meant something back then.
Sure.
You know? And Jensen as well was amazing. People just had this image of him just trolling people and doing whatever, you know. And I've been very, very fortunate, you know. They are all amazing people, and it's not like I discovered something. These are players that would eventually become great because of what they are, you know. I don't want to take credit at all for where they are now, because they are very, very strong individuals, very great individuals that would achieve success regardless, you know.
Sure, but I have a philosophy that, like, every person, this is why I think coaching as a field is so important. Every great coach or good coach you work with, you take something from, you learn something. Sometimes actually it might even be that it didn't work out with that coach, and years later you realize, oh, maybe I was too immature, or actually he had a philosophy on the game I didn't understand at the time. I think for good or for ill, you take something important from everyone you work with, in my opinion.
And it works the same in my direction too. I've learned, like, as a coach, it's tricky sometimes because you're supposed to judge your own self all the time and improve yourself. And I always want to find perspective of the players, and I've learned so much from the players as well. So it's, for me, the biggest reason why coaching is so interesting is just the self-development and the responsibility you have on your shoulder to be always a role model. So this is, to me, always exciting. And the players have taught me a bunch.
Right, being as, I mean, I thought about, it's not an LCS show, so I won't make the obvious joke that, like, maybe it was Loco who taught Bergson how to ruin junglers. I'll leave that one for a second show. There'll be a different show.
We should
make sense. I that one back in the can.
I still want to grab Yamato's opinion on it, like, as a fellow coach, like, later in the show.
Yeah, we'll do it at the end. Do that at the end, right? So the thing I want to ask about now, before we go into just talking about the other teams, it becomes a normal talk show. Let's just talk about what I referenced earlier, where we had this game against G2 that you won, and even though, like, I actually today published the show I did with Veteran where we had Cabashard. Like, Cabashard claims he actually thinks that the Garen pick for Wunder didn't end up influencing the game that much.
Oh,
like, if you actually
that's bullshit.
lost them the game, that they would have lost anyway, you know. But it is definitely the case where Wunder wasn't joking. Like, he clearly didn't particularly know how to play that champion and was kind of just trying something wacky in the game. So what were your thoughts on it? I mean, first of all, there's a funny line that Cabashard told me where he basically said, like, that of all the teams in LEC, G2 is the one that you spend the least time sitting around in a group trying to, like, theory craft what they're going to do, because it is kind of a fucking waste of time, isn't it? Like, you're never going to get that perfect flow chart where it's like, well, if they pick this, we'll take this, and then they'll do that. It's like that's like almost a waste of time to do. Like, they're going to pick what they're going to pick, and you have no way to know, because, so as you see from some of the mic checks, sometimes they don't know what they're going to pick.
Yes.
Oh,
well,
wait.
You know, go ahead.
So one thing that, like, stood out to me when they were drafting versus G2 was the Irelia ban. So I think I'm trying to remember.
Loco, wait there one second. Just let him answer the question about the part of that first. Then jump in on that one.
So I think, you know, obviously Garen made it easy, but I'm just gonna speak facts. Mowgli stole almost every blue buff this game. He won the 2v2 on top. We 2v2 killed them on bottom. We killed Rakan right after. We were ahead on multiple fronts. Multiple fronts, not just top lane. And it is really unfair to say that if they pick a different champion, maybe the game would look different. Of course it would. Of course it would. I can't say we would win every time if they would pick a different champion. I'm just stating the facts that we managed to get a massive advantage that had nothing to do with Garen or Karma. Whether we could translate that to a win or not, that's a different question, because once again, many things happen. You know, sometimes we throw games where we are 10k gold ahead. That happens. Sometimes you win games where you are 5k gold behind. Happens. So I think I will never take a position where, if they pick something else, we would win as well. No. I'm just stating the facts that we managed to get very, very far ahead with things that had nothing to do with Karma. And at the same time, I think our composition was really, really busted, like our draft. Crazy all around. And to the point about Cabashard and the preparation, you know, I like to prepare for every possible scenario when I come in. Against G2, I tried to do that once, had the worst draft ever. You know,
my joke is trying to prepare like that against G2. It's like you may as well have to be that fucking Doctor Strange cunt out of fucking like there's 7 million possibilities, and how many of them do they pick Garen in? One. Like,
wait,
you never get to it, would you? You never get to it.
I think it'd be so easy to prep versus G2. Just look at the signs that are on the stage, and then they'll just pick something off of that. That wasn't a bad joke. Give me credit for that one. Even Jizuke said, when I saw the Nocturne mid sign, I kept thinking of counters to Nocturne mid because I was so sure they were going to take something like Nocturne mid.
The best banter was when Fnatic took a picture of themselves in fake like disguises, holding up a sign telling G2 to pick something else. Like they actually took it was Young Buck and someone else in the team, which is pretty banter. I'll give them credit. By the way, generally, I'll say it to Fnatic, at least they're actually starting to learn now. You don't have to be salty because people bantered you. You can just banter back and have some fun. Like it's not as big a deal. But yeah, obviously it must be hard to prepare in that regard, right? Loco, what was your case going to be then as to why you think Garen was so impactful?
Okay, so I agree with Yamato on like the bot lane aspect. They 2v2 killed the bot lane. Like the fiddle, Jack Troll was actually a really good fiddle. And they built priority in mid and bottom. And off of that, Lee Sin was able to constantly invade and they denied blue twice. Like regarding bottom part of the map, 100% agree. Like it wouldn't have mattered if it was Garen. It wouldn't have mattered if it was an actual top lane pick. Like they got ahead by playing really well. So where I feel like the Garen pick really hurt G2, it's a part of G2 that I feel like gets overshadowed a lot because we talk about, G2 snowballing, G2 with all these flex pick. G2's macro, when it comes to when they're behind, is really good. They know how to come back. They know how to pressure multiple parts of the map. The fact that they had Garen made it so their mid game had no answers. Like Garen can't split versus Karma. And Garen in teamfight is a really donkey champion. Like he's just there. He really doesn't do anything. So in a lot of ways, they were playing 4v5. I think it's unfair to make the statement that G2 would have won if they didn't play Garen because Vitality did get a lead. But when it came to mid game, like it was just straight a 4v5 because they decided to go with Garen. And I do think that played like a huge part in the game just being a wash after the early game.
Do you have any counter to that? Do you care?
I think with our draft, like we had fucking Fiddle, Zaya, Corki, Karma, Lee. Think from a theoretical standpoint, I think if you are ahead with this, most of the time you're going to win game. You can't itemize for fiddlesticks, and you are going to scale like a motherfucker. But at the flip side, you know, we've lost horrible games, you know, so that happens. I think you cannot make a clear distinction. We would win, we would lose. That's impossible. I think, you know, I mentioned a couple of things that we did very, very good that game. There was also the Dragon fight. There was the Rift Herald preparation. There was the amount of platings that we got. You know, there was a lot of things that we did amazingly well that could translate into a victory. Because I think something that I came to the realization while preparing for G2 is that League of Legends has a lot of limitations. While G2 is an amazing team, there's a limit to how much they can fucking throw at you. Because most of the time, I think it gets into players' heads that, you know, we have an advantage, we need to do something with it. Because the first time we played against them, we had a big lead, and we just fucking, I listened to Cabo talking about the game. We TP'd on bottom, which was a disaster. We lost the full top tower, and we kept fighting in the jungle, and we lost in 24 minutes, while the first 10 minutes of the game were quite good, you know? So it's hard to judge, you know, different champion, different game, different result. It's hard to.
I think I agree with you. I think the people that are saying the Garen pick didn't matter at all, it's fucking bullshit. And people that don't give Vitality credit for what they were able to accomplish, like despite the Garen pick, also bullshit. There is like a middle ground, but people are just so hard on one way or the other.
Yeah. Here's one thing that actually people don't know though, and this is actually the first show that we'll have discussed this, because I actually saw it was Veteran himself who discovered this today. Veteran was looking through the rule book for LCS, right? The LEC. And it turns out they've changed the rule for tiebreakers. So the rule for tiebreaker now goes head-to-head record. Well, the reason why this is very interesting, Loco, is because OG and Vitality are 1-to-1 record head-to-head. The second tiebreaker is amount of wins in the second part of the split.
What?
Now, not only is Vitality 1 win ahead, but OG's been doing terribly in the last part of the split. OG's one of the main rivals. Now, that's very interesting, secondly, because G2 played properly against OG and fucking beat them a few weeks ago. So if I was OG, I'd be fucking raging about this Garen pick and being like, what the fuck are these guys doing? Like risking my fucking life in the tournament just to have a stupid pick because a fan in the crowd had a sign. So this actually, it seemed like a small deal. It just looked like a silly troll game and who cares? G2's qualified anyway, but it could actually have big implications for the playoff race.
Wait, let me get it completely clear. So
and OG, by the way, already had a really hard schedule to get into the playoffs, from what I remember. So I think it's pretty tough, actually.
So if OG and Vitality are tied at the end of the season and they have 1-to-1 head-to-head score,
I'll read it out.
Okay.
It says, tiebreakers. In the event that two teams are tied in the standings at the conclusion of the regular season split, the tie will be broken by their head-to-head record. If those teams have an identical head-to-head record, these teams do, the tie will be broken by wins in the second half of the split, with the team having more wins in the second half of the split being granted the higher place. That means that if Vitality and OG end up tied, Vitality automatically will be in the playoffs. And obviously, in theory, the only reason they'd have to argue like we would have won an extra game against G2 if they hadn't. But you know, this actually could have a big impact.
Wow. So they don't play a tiebreaker. It's just whoever won more games in the second half.
Right, when they say more games, they just mean for like so in the future they don't have to update the rulebook. There only is one second game in the second half of the split, so they already won that game like 2 weeks ago, or something, wasn't it?
At least we found out. You know, we found out about the rule.
It would have been funnier if,
at
as
the beginning
usual,
of the split, not
exactly,
like in an ALCS.
Yes. But did you actually know this rule though?
Yeah,
you did?
What I know,
For
sure. We were making jokes that it's the nerf to the old Vitality. No?
I see, because obviously you guys used to start strong and then drop off. Yeah, it is in a way. It's like whoever wrote that was like a fuck Vitality, I hate it or something, right?
That's why we went 0-4 in the beginning.
And then the third tiebreaker, bizarrely, says, and if the teams are still tied and one of them is Vitality, they do not make the playoffs. They do not pass go and they do not collect $200. It's weird. It's weird that they put that in the rules, you know. So, yeah.
In terms of like, I guess integrity and like in terms of how it felt as an opponent, how was it for you guys like when they locked in Garen?
I was just starting to think about interactions. I was like, okay, Jack Troll, remember when he presses W, don't fear him, he gets 60% tenacity and just fucking spewing all this random shit, you know, because, you know, I got this flashback to this conversation I had with Cabo. I was like, sometimes I just explore champion. Garen was on the list. It's like, there's a trick where Garen won tricks, they skill their ult, very, very late in the game, they just kill it when they're supposed to use it because it changes how the villain interaction works.
Yeah,
basically, the guy who got the latest kill is the villain. And the moment he skilled his ult, just straight up, I was like, okay, this guy, he doesn't know shit about Garen.
There we go.
God bless.
One of the only times you could ever look at Wunder and just go, look at this fucking amateur. He doesn't know what he's doing now. Brilliant, game on.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, our reactions in mic check, Mowgli was like, what the fuck? You know, and he rarely swears. Right? He exclaimed, what the fuck? And I was the same, but then I was like, okay, focus. Let's not make the same mistake as the last time. We've been positioned against G2 3 times that we were in a heavy lead and we just lost the game. So not this time, not today.
Like,
I don't care if it's Garen.
Being as normally on this show, and in fact every talk show I've noticed, everyone struggles to talk about G2 because they win all the time, all the players are great, and it's like all you do basically is run through a dictionary, look at whatever superlatives you haven't given them yet, like, oh, they're fucking geniuses, magnificent, fantastic, like, you know, it eventually gets boring because no one has anything meaningful to say because they have so few mistakes. So I thought one thing we could ask you about is you did coach Wunder before he was in this G2 team, and when he was a very different player, he was like a fucking Narman back then. So who was Wunder when you coached him, and who the fuck is he as a player now?
I think he just kept growing on what he was back then. You know, you say Nar one trick, but you know he's a guy that played many different metas. He was playing Ryze, he was playing Quinn, he was playing Gangplank. Like, he played 5 games of Gangplank against Shen to take us to the World Championship. So he was always a player that was willing to play everything. When a player is willing to play everything, it means that he has no limitation for what comes next. And what I liked about Wunder the most when I was working with Spice Boys was that when I joined the team, they were like, oh, YamatoCannon, he's experienced for a long time. We are the new guys, and they were just, you know, the beginners, and they were sucking in all this information. And I remember this first game, I told the guys, I was like, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I want you guys to draft and discuss draft and make a game plan. Just do it. I'm just going to observe. And it was just so basic. It was like, okay, we need to pick engage. Let's pick mob fight, and just no consideration of anything. And they were just running it down as 5, the good old North American special. And I remember Wunder always in discussions, as I was saying, okay, guys, you need to do this and this. Wunder was the only one challenging anything. He had his own thinking. He was, okay, I'm thinking like this. Why are we to be doing this? So that was very intriguing. It was challenging, even though he's just coming into the scene. So he wasn't taking anything for granted. He was willing to always expand and explore ideas by his own regard. And I think this is what elevated him as a player. He was always thinking critically about everything, about every role, about everything around him, about me, which was very, very good. And mechanically, he was always great. And with this mindset alone, I knew he was going to become better and better. And when you have such a mindset, that there is no limit to what you can become.
Duncan, going back a little bit on the Garen topic, did you feel like, what was your take in terms of like integrity? Because that was like a huge discussion, like regarding like not even this like tiebreaker stuff, like people playing random stuff when the standings are still up in the air.
Sure. I have basically 3 thoughts on this, roughly. One is I don't think G2 in any way actually should be punished, because technically you're allowed to pick anything you want in the draft. You're allowed to ban anything you want in the draft. Those things are all allowed in the game. It's not illegal. And most importantly, there is actually, even though, by the way, some tournaments actually do have rules that say this, there is no way to actually police the idea that you have to play at 100% in every game. That's just not a thing. Like, there's no way to tell if someone played at 100%. There's no way to tell if someone, like, for all we know, maybe Wunder secretly had a Smurf account. He'd played 500 games of Garen and he was going to carry this whole game. Yeah. So how can I punish him if he then did that? There's also been games, G2 themselves have done this, where they've done silly picks and won the fucking game. So again, how do you know what to... The big problem is this. This is the way I've logically thought it through, because I've had this happen a lot in Counter-Strike tournaments. Because in Counter-Strike tournaments, you guys have it in leagues, it's the same concept. They always used to do a group stage that's a round robin. And the worst thing about a round robin is you can have games that don't mean anything to one of the teams. So there can be a team that's like 0-2, and they can't even get in the playoffs if they win the last game. So odds are they're not going to give a shit, right? You can have a team that's 2-0, and they're guaranteed to make the playoffs because the other teams went 1-1 or something, and therefore they think to themselves, we'll troll on the last game. Or even worse, Loco, if it's a tournament like the old school ones where you know second place from Group A plays winner of Group C, and then you know Group C had an upset, you can throw the last game so you can get an easier opponent in the playoffs. These things all happened. Well, the point is, as a result of having this happen many times, I've thought through logically, like, right, who should really be to blame here and what should you do? As I said, there's no actual test for whether you were trying or whether you were trolling. Unless, like, you admit it like they did. But even then, they could be joking, they could be lying. Like, it's too murky territory. The real problem there is, it's the fault of the tournament organizer that you have a system where someone can play a game that doesn't matter anymore. Like, the idea that, like, I've already secured my top seed, so I control. That's a flaw of the system, I'm afraid. Because that game to G2 doesn't matter. I understand why for them. They're like, well, I'm sorry for you if you're in a playoff hunt, but I don't care anymore. Like, no, the other teams couldn't beat me in the league. It doesn't matter. If the league still mattered to G2 and they were in a playoff hunt themselves, no way they would do this. So you can see that I can't really blame them entirely. I will say, I totally understand if you're like OG, XL, Rogue. If you're the team, well, Rogue can't make any more, but if you're the teams that in theory could have made the playoffs, yeah, I would be fucking pissed off. I would be like, what the fuck? Why? So when G2 played me and it mattered, they stomped me and I had no chance. And then they play against this team who I'm battling with to make the playoffs and they pick Garen against them. Yeah, that would feel very unfair. The problem is I don't really see what you can do about it. So, like, I think that's the issue. There is something a bit fucked up about it. I don't think it was actually intended in that way by G2. I think they just didn't give a fuck and they only thought about themselves. But I think it does hurt the integrity of the league, in my opinion.
For sure. Like, my stance on it was, you know, in the beginning, I was like, it just felt weird. You know, what, if we win against this, how it's going to come across? Like, what is this? This is my initial thoughts as I'm shaking the hand, the coach. And, you know, I think what makes the entire situation difficult is that it's all just feelings. Because if we speak about the facts, we can't prove anything, and they get to do whatever the fuck they want, which is in the limitations of the game and the league. And they did. They didn't break any rule. They didn't like throw off their headset or something. They didn't break any rule at all. And as you said, I'm completely with you that even though it feels weird and it feels kind of weird and maybe OG is pissed off and for me it feels kind of weird, but these are all just feelings. And feelings don't fucking matter. You know, in the rule books, there's no, if the team is feeling bad, you know, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't exist. Feelings are bullshit in business. So it is what it is. You know, you can view it on the flip side as well. Like, oh, if this game ends up mattering, maybe you should have played better against this team or this. So the arguments from the other side can also be made. But of course, it's kind of weird. From my personal perspective, it is kind of weird. I can imagine that it must be frustrating and annoying, but it is what it is. G2 can do whatever the fuck they want, as long as they don't sign some affidavit. Oh, we trolled, we threw this game, we hate OG, whatever. As long as that doesn't happen, nothing's gonna ever happen. Yeah. I think G2 themselves, speaking of feelings, I don't think they give a shit about anyone else.
Exactly.
And I think that's also part of what makes them.
It's kind of a champion's mindset. They're like, well, listen, it's your fault you're in trouble down at the bottom of the table, mate. I don't give a fuck.
It is their prerogative to do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just need to feed my cat. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. Well, while you're gone, I'll just tell Loco a little story. Because do you know, Loco, you won't know this, you won't remember. This actually happened in history. There was a team that did a troll pick, and as a result, you got to win an international trophy that I don't think you would have ever won.
What, IEM?
Yeah.
Who trolled?
So the best team in the world at the time of the IEM Season 9 Championship in, I think, March of 2015 was GE Tigers from Korea. They were #1 in Korea. They were doing the Juggernaut. They were smashing everyone. They even beat, I can't remember if they'd beaten SKT yet, but I think they'd already beaten SKT.
Yeah, they were one of the best teams, I remember.
They were #1.
Yeah.
And in the semi-finals, because they played the WE team, who changed 3 players before they came to the tournament, what happened was they won game 1, and they thought, easy, who gives a fuck about this Chinese team? So for game 2, Kuro played Yasuo mid, a champion he had never played in an official game in his career. They lost the game, lost the 3rd game, and as a result, you got to play the WE team in the final and win that championship. Now, I can't say what would have happened, but mate, GE Tigers was a fucking good team at that time. So that ends up being a game where it would have been a funny piece of trivia if they'd have won the game, but inadvertently, it ended up starting the snowball that fucked them out of the tournament and totally changed the winner of the tournament.
I'll take a neutral stance on this. GE Tiger definitely would have been a much harder opponent than WE. I don't think I can say in good faith that we would have beaten them for sure. It definitely would have been harder, but that matchup still would have been interesting, and I would have liked to have seen what that would have done.
Of course, I think everyone would have. It should have happened, really. You know?
And long term, maybe if we did play them in the finals and we lost to them, maybe we get even better and we win summer finals.
Mate, either way, it would have been better for everyone, because if you'd have lost, also then it would have been a different team for TSM. Secondly, if you'd have won, it would have been a massive achievement. Would have been that would have been basically the equivalent, for anyone who doesn't realise. That would have been not quite as ridiculous, but would have been almost like TL beating IG. It was a best of 5 as well.
Yeah, I really did want to play them, and that tournament, I'm so happy we won an international tournament, but it does have an asterisk towards it because we beat World Elite and we didn't beat GE Tigers.
Sure. Anyway, right, let's talk about some of the teams then. So,
I really want to ask Yamato about a team. Can I?
Okay.
Yamato, I have to ask you, why is OG struggling so much? And I heard from how the matchups are now and with the schedule that's left, it's more likely that OG doesn't make playoffs. And I think that would have been a crazy statement to make at the start of spring or start of summer. And also, even when OG was struggling, no one really worried about OG. They're like, oh, it's OG, they'll pick it up. It's pretty late in the split and they still haven't picked it up. What is wrong with...
Just since I earlier said it, I was wrong actually. They don't have a crazy hard schedule. The games are winnable, some of them. It's just that I think they have to win every single game, and even then it's not they might not make it.
I think they face the bottom 3 teams, Misfits, Rogue,
and then Splice. So they have one good game, basically. I mean, the others are not terrible teams anymore as well, so there's no free wins in LEC nowadays, except SK.
Yeah, I think with how the league is structured, it's very bottom heavy, top heavy in terms of scores, because all the teams are 4 points, maybe 5. I don't remember 4 points. Let me just
keep going. I'm just going to kill a spot.
There's the playoff team is at 6 wins right now, and then the bottom 3 teams are at 4 wins. So there's only a 2-win difference.
Okay, so there's Rogue on 5. I see. Okay, because even that I would give them decent odds. If I speak to OG, in terms of being able to predict this, in scrims in spring, they were still a really, really good team. They were a strong team, and they were just not performing on stage. I think it's weird with OG because my assessment has always been that I remember when I was preparing against OG in the past, when it was Mithy, Expeke, and so forth. My plan of approach was always if we attack Mithy, then the entire game plan of the map falter. And this is very, very ancient and very, very old. But at the time it worked.
That makes sense.
We were 2-0 against Origin in the regular split. There was this hyped up match. Oh, 6-0 versus 6-0. This is one we want to see. But we took it away by beating OG back in the Rocket days. And I think OG, my impression is always, if they get to flow in the game, meaning that they keep things predictable and they get to play what is considered a macro game, and you have to challenge them at that level, I think is very, very difficult. But I think right now they are struggling to find the right picks, to find the right ways to reach that point. I feel like OG reminds me a lot of what G2 used to be with Mithy, meaning that they get you to that point where macro-wise they just outmaneuver you, they have good mechanical players, and I think the struggle for OG, when I see them struggling, is getting to that point, because the game against us, we rustled some feathers, and all of a sudden OG just looks like a ghost of what they usually are, because we shook them in the early game. And I think when OG figure out how they want to draft, how they want to play to simplify the early game as much as possible, then I think they are much better as a team. And I think the biggest mistake that they did in Spring Split was they didn't identify what was their strongest player at the time, which was Nuktak, and then transitioning pressure through mid into bottom, Zed and the Carters. This is what they did the best. And I think knowing, because I worked with Cold, I worked with Nuktak, I worked with Mithy, if they are similar to what they used to be in the past, then some of this that I'm saying should be true. I think when they figure out the right way to draft for them, that simplifies early game, I think they will look much, much greater. But I have no worries that they will not reach playoffs, because I think in a best of 5 scenario, OG, when they get to prepare against one opponent only, I think they look much better, because I think they really need that. They need that preparation edge to make sure that they get to that point where they have those strengths.
I noticed, though, the player who's getting a lot of criticism is your old mate Cold, the jungler, because people basically say he went from being like, a lot of people had liked the way he was jungling at the beginning of the split when they started off strong, and basically he's the guy who people think's kind of bad at the moment, is underperforming.
I think Cold as a player, I think when he's playing in a meta where he gets to play the same champions over and over, he's a master at this. Like there was the meta in Splice where basically there was 2 junglers in the game, which was Gragas and Rek'Sai, and everyone agreed we're not going to ban any of them, and we're just going to let our junglers play them for the rest of the split. So I think Jonas, when his biggest strength, I think, is getting away with a lot in a weaker jungle matchup. For example, he was playing Karthus, did very, very good pathings to make sure he didn't get punished, and then he just outskilled because he found better, and he impacted the game in this regard. I think this split, there's been many, many meta changes in the jungle. There was the Sylas, there was the Kiana, there was the Lee Sin. There was a bunch of jungle picks that you can make a massive list of. And I think this is where a player like Jonah have a harder time. But I think it ties into my original point. When they get to really, when they have good preparation, I think OG is a very, very strong team, dangerous. I think Cold fits that mold very, very, because as I said, the biggest strength is, when he's playing those matchups that are considered weaker on paper, he does very well.
Okay. What do you think, Loco? What do you think of Origin?
Oh, man, they're a really hard team to figure out for me, because I agree with the early game being a problem, but OG and Spring, even when they had early game problems, they were doing really well. So I don't want to go swing the other way back around and be like, I guess I don't have strong opinions, and I have just more questions for Yamato. If it's early game that's problematic, if they just fix the early game, do you think they'll be right back where they were, going back to the top 3 and contesting with the G2s and the Fnatics?
I trust the ability of Nuktak and Mithy so much that I believe that their ability to decipher what to do next in the game is still as sharp as ever, because they are incredible players. They've stuck around for such a long time for a goddamn reason. They go to top spots in the region for for a good reason as well. So maybe Mithy and Benet, a rough one. But because if I look at Spring as well, it was also like, I remember this horrible game against Fnatic. It was like a level 1 invade, Mithy died, and then it was game over. They couldn't recover. They died. Over. Fnatic won the minute. And that was many games. I remember there was one where I think Mithy Tamkench is what rings the bell the most, when he was inting some of the early games back in Spring. And I think OG for me, if early game is as calm as possible, I think they are very, very. But teams in the LEC right now don't want to make it calm. I think the LEC is coming to life in the early game. Okay.
Right, let's move on then. Let's talk about another team. What do you think of the Splice team then? Because what's funny is with all the stuff that we just set up earlier, a lot of people, even though actually the bizarre thing about Splice is sometimes they have a good early game, it's just that then whatever happens between the early game and the late game, which they haven't found out what that's called yet, they then just have to wait until 30 minutes to win the game, apparently. So it's like they're someone who has like... I won't make that analogy actually. Whatever, we'll skip that one. What basically people would see them as like the opposite of Vitality. Basically, they're a team who've won a lot of games and played very, very well in the late game with team fighting late. So, what do you think of Splice?
I think Splice has taken time to get to the point where they are at. I think previous alteration of Splice when they were really, really just late game, really, really all out late game, like. We have a free tower to take. We're not going to take it. We're going to base and play safe. That extreme. I think they did that because of the limitations they had in players. I think the players at the time couldn't really dominate lane. I think Kobe and Kassing, they couldn't pressure lane at all. I remember when we played against them, we naturally got like a 60 CS lead, and we won the game off of that because the lane phase was just strong. And I think the coaching staff, what I assume is that they identified that they couldn't really find advantages through laning, so they just had to draft towards the strength. And I think when they made some changes, they brought in Vichichachi and Humanoid. Yeah. I think they've lifted some of those limitations, and I also think Kobe and Noshkaren are playing much, much better as a duo. Spring Split, I think Noshkaren was...
Is that the way you're supposed to say his name if you're from the Nordic region?
I guess.
We just say Garen.
Noshkaren. It's naturally...
Okay, fair enough. We learn something every day.
It's like Svenskeren. So it's natural for me to say it like this. I think he also has come to life. Kobe and Noshkaren, they're actually like a lane that can lane and they are active. I think Xerxes was always a great jungler. I think he has a lot more lanes to play with right now, and I think that is enabling him, because Xerxes was always considered a very dangerous jungler, even though it's funny because people said, oh, Spice is his late game team, but Xerxes was still ranked among the best junglers.
Sure.
And
which is unusual. Seems counterintuitive initially, but I see what they mean.
And I think Splice, as a team, they are identifying the problems that they're trying to push further. They're trying to become more aggressive, trying to add to their strengths. And I think that's always a positive thing. You know, we can clearly see throughout the split that Splice is improving. And as long as that's the case, you can imagine that the team has a good atmosphere, I think, and a good kind of culture to improve on. And I think in the past, player limitation, now they're starting to do things in the early game. So I think it's positive. I think a great game, a great example of Splice was their game against Fnatic, where they just utterly demolished them. They came in with a creative pick with the Kiana Gragas. They just pressured the mid lane super, super hard, and they took over the game. Splice is definitely a good team.
What do you think, Loco? This is a team that is 10-4 in the league and already is guaranteed a playoffs.
Their color really changed. I agree with Yamato. It's even between spring and summer, where they still had the same roster, but in summer, their bot lane became way more aggressive, like actually willing to build leaves and actually willing to do something with it. And Humanoid found a stride with the Azir Quirky, and as Yamato mentioned, the Kiana coming into the pool. I think it's really easy. I think it's really easy to view them as the kind of like slow team fighting team, and it's a lazy narrative that they still are that team. They're much more proactive. They play around their mid lane more, and they're much more willing to snowball with the leads they have from mid and bot. And they don't get that lost in mid game. They do snowball now. They do rotate better. They do force the objective in a way where it's not just like we're setting up and you need to come into us, and they're doing it in very, very slow ways where they're like, okay, we have a lead, minimum vision, we're still willing to start the objective.
It's also funny that people call them a late game team, because even in late game in the past, the decision making was awful.
It's their team fighting that was really good, more so than their decision making.
It was pretty much when enemies start Nash and they walk into the pit and they fought and Kobe popped off. That was pretty much it, and they're carrying them through that. Because I remember many games where we were behind against Splice, and we just they're not gonna start Nash. It's not gonna happen. And then the best example is the Vayne Karthus game. We had Vayne Karthus. They did nothing for the entire game. Vayne Karthus had 6 items and we won the game. Like that was ridiculous. But we recognized in game, okay, we made mistakes early. We threw what could have potentially been a lead, and we're like, okay, we need to get 6 items, otherwise we're not gonna win this game. They're not gonna start Nash. If they start Nash, we just press Karthus R and they're gonna run away like a rat, you know? And that was the case. So it's funny that they're called a late game team, because I don't even know if they were that. But right now they are very, very good.
Okay. Right, well, let's shift up and talk a bit about Fnatic then, because even though Fnatic also is 10-4, also has locked in a playoff spot, the last few weeks have been a lot harder. I mean, they've won 3 games, lost 3 games. One of those was to G2, so okay, the big marquee matchup. One, though, was to the Misfits Academy team, so there's one. And then one was when they, to be fair, one of the losses was when they subbed out Reckless and they had Nemesis play bot lane or whatever the fuck, and then they lost to Rogue was that game. So what do you think about where Fnatic is at?
I think Fnatic is, like we're playing them this weekend.
It's the next game, I think, isn't it?
We play SK first, I believe, and then Fnatic.
Yes, you're right, okay.
And Fnatic as a team is always interesting to prepare against them, because they've taken a completely different approach to the game. They just want to create comfort for the players. They want to make sure that all pathways of how to play the game at any point in the game have been explored and have been made. I think this is something that has been very clear in past alterations of Fnatic as well. They've stuck to playing the same champions. Even in the Caps era, it was overshadowed because all the focus was on Caps and his champion pool and Reckless champion pool, and they were just popping off. But everyone on that team, Hylissang, Broxa, and Whippo, were playing the same champions over and over. I think there's a massive strength in that they have created the pathways for whatever point in the game they are in. Even though the game against G2 looked completely doomed, they managed to find some kills here and there, which is an impressive thing against G2 that we praise for their mid game. So this is a big strength of theirs, but at the same time it's their weakness, right? Because G2 in the post-game lobby grab said that this is what we expect to draft, this is what we prepared for it. So I think Fnatic, they have a predictability about them, but you can predict them to be very consistent, right? So that's a massive strength, and I like consistency, because this is something that my team has struggled with these past 2 years. So Fnatic as a team, I think coming into playoffs, best of 5s, I think this approach will be rough. We saw it in spring in playoffs when they faced OG. They had this recipe for success. It got dissected by OG, and all of a sudden Fnatic was a ghost. It was no longer a team, because they were playing things where all these pathways, all these things that they could rely on in game were no longer there. And I think this is a massive strength of the Fnatic coaching staff, because even though they are considered a top team, they you don't necessarily point to their players and say they have the best players in each position. You know, it's not necessarily the case.
You hear that, Loco? You hear that? I just want to check you're okay with that now. It's okay when he says it, though, right?
No, I'm definitely talk on that. All right. So I agree with Yamato, and also I have been watching Fnatic and Excel really closely ever since the Kelsey veteran comments regarding the Brock.
That Kedro guy's pretty fucking good, isn't he?
Well, I mean, when we talk. I'll start with the Kedro one. It's kind of off topic, but Kedro's passed really well, but he still has so much just like really big mechanical blunders. Like even versus like Vitality, when they're starting Baron, like he's just on Baron the whole time, so the Gragas just walks up use his ult, and Kadril's just tanking until he dies, missing EQ on like flat ground. Like I still don't believe like if he replaced Broxa, Fnatic would be better because just mechanically he can't match up. And going back to Yamato's point regarding Fnatic and their system, or how like they play towards their comfort, and Kelsey's point regarding like them having a system, I actually agree on both points. Like Fnatic definitely has a system. There is like a way they play very, very consistently, and they go to those comfort champs again and again. And I do think their level varies when they are pushed off that comfort champ. It was really apparent in the Fnatic versus G2 match when Hillsong was pushed off of Rakan and Pyke. They banned Rakan and they G2 first rotation Pyke. And Hillsong ended up playing Kench. And the way he played Tahm Kench, I thought was pretty bad. I thought it was actually god-awful. He's constantly roaming. He's constantly like being mid lane. And they didn't enable...
Because that's how they play as a team, unfortunately, right? So that's the problem. He has to keep doing it if they want the system to work.
Yeah, and it's just... If you're not on Pyke and Rakan, like all these roams mid lane as Kench, it's bad. Like it's really hard to accomplish things. So I really see the system point and I really see the comfort point, and I am worried for them when it gets to playoff. And I think G2 put up a really great blueprint on how to play versus Fnatic. Don't enable Rakan Pyke for Hillsong and play around mid lane, and they are going to struggle. So I'm curious to see how other people are gonna like handle Fnatic, and if they follow the same blueprint, what Fnatic's gonna do to reply. Because Hillsong is one of their best players, and when he doesn't get his champions, he just looks like a different player.
Well, the thing, like Veteran's point on that one, which I sort of saw the logic to, is if they require Hillsong to play in the way that he has to in their team, he's going to look bad in these games. But what he's doing is what he has to do to help the others. So it's actually like a tough spot to be in that sense. I'll even say an extra reason why I think it's actually quite clever what Yamato brought up about them making them just play a limited champion pool. Like everyone can see the obvious benefit that the player himself only has to play the few champions and get to know it. That's even better for increasing chemistry. Because then you also are always playing with the same champions on your teammate. So now you know literally when my teammate's on that champion what I do, as opposed to, that's one of the reasons why I also think G2 are just godlike. If you're playing all these different compositions all the time, and sometimes comps you don't even play in practice, it's all well and good thinking you know what that champion's going to do with another one. But if you barely played that, you're still assuming, like you're still having to put in the range of, well, who is the player that is doing that and what his tendencies, and then what can the champion do, and how would you, like if you played the same three champions, all of you in the team, for loads and loads and loads and loads of games, especially because within that it's stated quite logically that it can't be the most meta champions, because otherwise people would just ban the keyboard and you'd be fucked. So some of these are probably even stuff that is like you're just going to get every game. So you're probably even giving a little something up there. But what you're going to gain if you're a team that had chemistry problems, and let's face it, if you look at the Spring Fnatic early on, they had no identity. Forget like issues in the team. They looked like just 5 different players running around the map. So it's a very clever fix, I have to say. And I don't want to hate on Fnatic because they have to use it. Like I think they're just in the position they're in with the players they have. But I kind of go Yamato's way. I kind of praise the coaching stuff. I think it's a very clever approach to take.
It's
I just wanted to add, you know, like when players, when people ask me, like, how do I climb in solo queue? The way I tell them is become a one trick. Learn the game from the perspective of one champion. Because when you no longer need to think about your mechanics, about everything else. I feel like it's when you're in a team environment, it's as if you are traveling down the same road over and over. First time maybe you need a GPS, the next time you don't need to. And all of a sudden, you know, let's say they're building something, so this road is closed off, you have a bump in the early game. All of a sudden you take this different route and you're practicing that over and over. And all of a sudden you have this map from the starting point that is this simplified draft. And you know all the fucking different pathways that you can go through. And I think having that simplicity can really cover a lot of bases because you're going to, when you're going down that road, you're going to be more experienced than the players that you're playing against. And I think to your point as well, Thorin, what teams do when they have big champion pools is really fucking difficult. While individual mistakes can be called out for, like, oh, this guy got caught here, or these guys are not pressuring anything, it's very easy to simplify mistakes. But being able to have this pathway built in-game, you know, if you have the system where you are actively looking for the solution to the problem of how do we break the enemy nexus, that's what G2 is doing. They don't have a system, and I think that's fucking hard. and it's very, very underestimated, rarely talked about, because it's always, oh, this guy did a mistake. Top Reddit, oh, what a wanker. And what the fuck is he doing?
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of work behind it, so I'm glad you brought G2 up.
Like, to me, that type of aspect, whenever people have chemistry in the way that they do, it goes beyond just the game and coaching and these sorts of things. Like, that wasn't taught to those players. The same thing, the equivalent in Counter-Strike would be, like, we do have a term called team play, which is kind of like chemistry. But for me, the comms is where it's like in Counter-Strike. Because in Counter-Strike, I've made this example before. If you watch some of the absolute best teams, it's counterintuitive. They don't comm all the time.
G2.
It's actually the bad teams that comm 24/7. What happens is these teams just know what each other's going to do. Like, they have something beyond basic team play. Like, there's some, like, these two players were almost meant to play together, or this player just, his style and strengths just perfectly overlap with the other guys, and they can play off each other, and they don't have to say literally everything they're doing. Like, I'm going to go here and you're going to do that, and all that. That's what you would have to say if you didn't know anything about each other. So to me, that's the big problem. Is like put it this way. I'm not one of these people who wants to take credit away from Grabs. I'd imagine he's doing a very good job managing those egos, setting up the basic aspects of the team, probably coaching aspects that leave a hole for them to do these crazy picks and weird things they want to do. But he definitely didn't sit them down and teach them all how to be such incredible teammates and do all the ridiculous shit they're doing at a drop of a hat in the game. That's just something, that's like, it's just talent, basically. It's a type of talent and a bit of luck that you got the right players together.
Sure. Like, to add to that point, the way I view it is, if you have a perfect team, they shouldn't have to say anything, because everyone should know what the fuck they should do.
I'll tell you how it goes, Gil. I had a line like this. You'll like it. One time, someone asked me in an AMA for League of Legends. Actually, it was the first one I ever did. They said, "What would your dream team be?" And this is like in season 3 or something, mate. So obviously, I made a team that's ridiculous. It was like Froggen and Mad Life and fucking Flame, like some team that would never play together. I think I might have even had like Uzi or something. I had some lineup that wouldn't even on paper make sense. But the line that I said, it goes with what you're saying now. I said the whole thing is, though, because of the players I've picked, they wouldn't need to communicate because they already communicate in the language of the game.
Yeah.
There you go. There's the line.
Very beautiful. So you put it better than I did. I think just communication is bridging that gap to perfection. You're not robots, right? It's just you fill the gaps with communication. It's a thing with my guys too. The things that need to be said is very different from different alterations of teams. So it's different things that need to be addressed. You create, let's say, I create a phrase. Okay, you guys need to, at this point in the game, you need to raise the question, what do we do next? And all of a sudden it sparks everyone's imagination, right? And for a different team, it's something else. Maybe they need to say, before the game starts, go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden that clicks something. I don't know. It was a silly example, to get my point. It's communication is bridging the gap that you can't achieve. That gap between yourself and perfection. Perfection is unattainable. You try to reach for it, and you create these communication bridges to solve the issues.
Let me think. I think we'll do one more team, and then we'll do those last topics you want to do, Loco. So, let's see. Let's just do the last team, the next team in the rankings. Obviously, the one game above Vitality. What about Schalke then? So this is the guy we had the coach of Schalke on the last week's episode, actually. Because I was booking the guests, so that's a good one. So, what do you think about this team then? Obviously, like dead set with you rivals. You might, who knows? Not even impossible. Don't think he can play them in the playoffs, but whatever. What do you think of Schalke, Yamato?
I think they're very one-dimensional. I think out of the teams that are in contention, or like the teams that I assume are going to be in playoffs, I think Schalke is going to be the weakest one. Because I see no growth. I see very little change. I see Ignar is playing better than he used to, because I think the meta suits him much better now than it did last split. But I think they have a very set mold for how they want to play the game. Schalke, they're playing for objectives. You can expect them to set up around Dragon, set up around Rift Herald. More than that, they don't do much. Sometimes they gank around mid lane. But if enemy contests that, they usually fuck it up. And then there's Upset playing out of his mind most games. Just try to carry them. So many games I saw when Schalke is losing, it's like, oh, he has a scoreline of 7-0-0. Then it's like everyone else is just running it down. And he's just trying to fucking kill people, with his Kaiser, whatever the fuck. And I just feel like every Schalke game looks always the same. Always the same. And they have... good fundamentals, I believe. Good fundamentals. They know how to close out the game. They know how to convert a lead to a victory. But I don't think they do anything imaginative or creative in terms of creating leads. You don't see them stomping any lane. You see them snowballing out of control. Maybe one occasion I remember that Skarner game that Trick played where he got a gank mid and a gank top. This was one example. Sure, it happens, but I think Schalke, they've stagnated, I believe. I don't think they are improving as rapidly as everyone else, and I think they're going to be the weakest team in the playoffs. And I don't know why that is. My impression is that maybe they are lacking strong characters that the previous alteration of Schalke had.
What do you think, Loco?
I'm surprised he said they're weak, because I agree with him regarding Schalke being very one-dimensional, upset-based team fighting team, but they improved so much more than what they were in spring in terms of Abadage especially. Like Abadage in spring was... I thought he was the worst rookie out of the Nemesis, humanoid Abadage, like that crop of new rookies, and he's shown to be...
And he still is.
He still might be, but he's so much better than what he was in spring, and Trick replacing Memento gave them how to play around objectives, actual synergy between mid and jungle. It's not the best synergy in EU, but it is actual synergy. Like, if you compare them to spring, they're a functional team. They're a team that's going to make playoffs. They're a team like that people have to prep for. Yes, they might be one-dimensional, but it's way better than what they gave us in spring, no?
Sure. Yeah, it's not... I believe in spring they were one-dimensional, but the dimension is not the same as they're in right now, if that makes sense. Like they were very predictable back in spring, and I think they're predictable summer too. But in a sense, the level of predictability they're at right now, like it's a completely different kind of environment. They are playing differently, but still one-dimensional. And I think still, sure. Right now, at the current time, right now, they're a good team. But I don't see them improving as much as the other teams coming into playoff. And I think when you go into best of 5 series, those are things that are going to be addressed and exposed. And many games I see many team fight mistakes from everyone else, but upset on that team. I see Nars jumping in and, just dying. And this is something that Odamne has done entire career, as I remember. And I think Abadage, watching his point of view, I think mechanically he does many mistakes, even though they show his replays of Akali on the VOD, and I just cringe because he's barely using his passive. But we lost against them because they are good at snowballing a game. They are good macro-wise. I think when they actually get leads, when they get those fights around Dragons, when they get those fights again around Rift Herald, and they win those, then they get victories. And I remember this one specific game where nothing happened the entire game. They were getting pushed, they were getting CS leads, and then all of a sudden around the Dragon, Upset gets a triple kill, and all of a sudden they take the game away. But if that fight doesn't happen to them, in our game, we fucked up a fight at Rift Herald, they took it away, and then all of a sudden they snowballed the game. If that fight doesn't happen, Schalke looks kind of lost. And I think that is where their weakness lies. But maybe I overemphasized saying that they are... I didn't mean to say that they are weak. I just believe out of all the other 4 teams that we might... 5 teams that we might face in playoffs, I think Schalke is going to be the one easiest. Perfect.
Okay. I would put it this way, Loco. Like, so I have similar thoughts in as much as, like, if you look at the teams that could make the playoffs, so obviously we don't know yet whether that'll be Vitality or OG. Like I said, there's actually, because of the tiebreaker rule, there's an extra reason it can be Vitality, aside from being 1 game up. But put it this way, if I don't care what the records are at the end of the split. If I'm the other teams in the playoffs and I have a choice between who I'd rather have be the team playing there, Schalke or OG, I would fucking pick Schalke 100% of the time. Like, OG has the potential to get it all together and be fucking really dangerous, win best of 5s against most teams, maybe even, if things go really well, go head-to-head with the top teams. The problem with Schalke is they have no teeth. Like, where's the superstar player? It's Upset, right? Probably the worst position to be a superstar player at right now in fucking League of Legends, AD carry. Then you go and look elsewhere in the team. I mean, Odo's probably had one of his not so great splits. Looks like he hasn't been as good as he was in spring at times.
Very
they got a
average.
slight boost in mid, but they don't have anywhere close to the best. I made this point actually before, Yamato. No one's ever thought this way generally, because you can't as a coach think this way. It'd be ruining it completely. I made this point to Veteran, which is that it's all well and good trying to make teams that are good and can play well and all the rest of it. But Europe is not just known as the mid region. I thought it through, right? The worst mid laner to win the LEC/LCS title is Febiven in Season 5, because the only other people to ever win is Caps, Prime Caps. You have Prime Expecke, you're Froggen in Season 4. Am I missing one? I think that's it.
Perks.
Oh, and Perks. There you go, and Prime Perks. So I'm not even dissing Febiven, by the way, by saying he's the worst. I'm actually trying to show you that if that's the worst mid laner to ever win EU LCS, you've got to have a fucking good mid laner to win this league. Now, if Schalke goes on to be the amazing exception to that rule that does it, props to him. But right now, I don't think mid lane's the position I want to have one of my weaker players at, to be honest. Not in Europe, at least, for fuck's sake.
I think also the conversation that I'm thinking about a lot is, for example, last year we went to Worlds instead of over Schalke, pretty much, right? And I from of course I'm a bit biased, but from an outside point, if I compare us to going to the World Championship over Schalke, I think we created more ruckus than Schalke could cause. Then when I look at the teams in the LEC who could actually do something at the World Championship, I imagine OG, Fnatic, G2, then of course us. Schalke and Splice, I don't believe that they are good enough to bring something to the table that is refreshing and new, because I think that's usually what is the most powerful when you go to a World Champion. And I think that ties into the idea of, our teams just miniature versions of the teams above them, and sometimes I feel like that's what they are, and I think Schalke is that, like if Schalke played against Fnatic in a best of 5, is Upset going to dominate Reckless 3 games? I doubt it.
Even if he did, they probably won't win.
Yeah, I certainly doubt it. I think this is also a big part of my thought process.
Okay. Like, what were the last topics, Loco? I will say this. Remember, we do have an LCS show tomorrow, so don't blow your load on it too early.
Let's just
pick something you need to ask now.
Let's just briefly touch on the TSM jungle news, because it broke today. So TSM, after announcing Acadian is their starting jungler and having the video, they had Spica play last weekend, and then so as an LCS team, you have to send in your roster about 72 hours before the actual match starts. So they sent in their roster for the playoff match versus Clutch, and it does not include Acadian or Grig. So their playoff roster is Broken Blade, Spica, their academy jungler, Bjergsen, Zben Smoothie, and then the 2 subs they're bringing are Tactical and Treat, their academy bot lane. Acadian and Grig cannot play in playoff.
Ole.
First of all, Yamato, do you actually watch LCS? If you don't, by the way, don't feel ashamed. I mean, it's obviously a minor region. But what do you think?
I watch a couple of games, but I respect the decision.
Okay.
I like it. I like it a lot. Isn't his name a bit racist? I don't know.
Spica?
Spica? I think
that's only if the A
slurs.
is taken off there, as far as I know. So I think it's going to be considered fine,
Okay.
Funny enough, the other jungler's name, Grig, he used to go by Grignay, and he has to change his name to Grig because Grignay could be perceived as racist.
It's an acronym.
Yeah.
No, not an acronym. It's what's the term for it?
An acronym, no?
No, acronym
Anagram?
is anagram. There you go.
Yeah.
It's an anagram of a certain word. Yes.
I think sometimes you reach a point where you can recognize that the dynamics don't work, and I've been there many, many times. No matter what you do, it doesn't work. And it happened with my team when we brought in Kikis. Just that fresh of fresh air.
Yes.
Jesus Christ, it's way too late.
It's all right. We got it in the end. Yeah.
And I think it can be very invigorating to play with someone new because you get to reinvent yourself. You know? All of a sudden, all those things that you do good, when something goes bad, they no longer matter in a League of Legends environment. So that alone, when you bring in a new player and things click, because it seemed to do the games that they played with Spica, it seemed to look better than previous alterations, even though they seem to have trouble still. I think that alone is a good reason to take such a decision. To be so harsh, to not even put them on the bench, that's fucking crazy. That must mean that it was fucking awful with Greg and Acadian. I didn't watch the last episodes of TSM Legends.
Exactly. That means not only you haven't been keeping up on the soap opera. All right, you got to get the girlfriends round, have a night in.
Only watching it when I can see Locodoco.
Oh,
those were
TSM Legends.
That was the best season. That was definitely the best
funny
season.
Shit, man.
Locodoco was his role was kind of like Charlie in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He was that kind of a character in TSM.
Which one is Charlie?
He's the one who's like the idiot, basically. He's just like the janitor and goes on helping everyone and stuff. He can barely read and whatnot. But he's
the arena Thorin. The arena Thorin. The arena.
Hilarious. He's hilarious. So that's all that matters. Well, the real joke there obviously would be, and it's just because he's brought it up now, is what someone did was, there's a famous saying, right, that cultures, whenever they hit a crisis point, what they do is they look back into their shared history and they look for the last moment when everything was stable and good, and they try and move back to that in society, right? So what happened was TSM took a similar approach, because you have to understand, Reginald's a great thinker. He's kind of like a modern day Socrates or something, He sees time in future arcs. Remember, he's made many interviews about he's building TSM to win worlds one day. So it's a very ambitious strategy at the moment, but we'll see how it goes. Who knows? Maybe Acadian was going to win worlds. I don't know. You know better than me, Reggie. Or do you? Right. So here's what he did, right? He looked back in time and he said, I figured it out, guys. When was the last time we had a good jungler? And they were like, I think Sven Skaren was pretty good when he was there the first few splits. And they were like, yes. And what did Sven Skaren do before he joined our team? He had a racist name. Get me a guy with a racist name. And it's like, and he thought if he fulfilled all the first steps, then it'd all work out, wouldn't it? So he's on step 2 at the moment. Give him a chance, Loco. He's got the racist name guy. Now he's on step 2, which is put him in the game. So this is ridiculous, isn't it, Loco? Now here's the thing. Obviously, I'll do a lot of this tomorrow, so we'll see.
Just give a quick thought.
I did just tell you the whole time, even when Acadian was doing well, did I not tell you this? I told you I still thought he shouldn't be the jungler for TSM. That should be replaced. He's just not a good enough player, mate. I'm not hating on him. It's like I said on Twitter. Like, why do we expect they're going to be good? They were considered up-and-coming players 3 years ago. 3 years ago, you were a coach, mate. The life was different. Donald Trump wasn't even elected. Well, he might have been, actually. No, he wasn't. 3 years ago, there wasn't even a Donald Trump elected. Like, the world was different. You have to understand. We were through the looking glass.
Oh, man. As you said, we'll talk about it a lot tomorrow, but so crazy. I cannot believe they did this. And as Yamato said, I cannot believe they didn't even put Acadian as a sub.
Exactly. That is despicable. That is despicable.
That you know what that is though?
I didn't get that one. Keep going.
They are also saying they don't have confidence in their bot lane. Not only they're shitting on 3 people by not putting Acadian in their sub and putting in tactical and treats. They're also shitting on their bot lane and saying like, in all sense of
we can replace you at any moment in the game. Yeah.
It's crazy. I can't even believe.
All I'm going to say is it's a bold strategy, Reggie. Let's see how it works out.
Let's see.
I think it's crazy though that they've been through so many fucking junglers that there has to be, even though sometimes you can have an amazing player, but sometimes maybe there are some habits that built up that are making it harder.
Just the wrong team for him or something. Yeah.
Sometimes junglers, I've seen in many teams where teams have struggled with the idea of a jungler because they set very unrealistic expectations for what the jungler should be, and then they play differently and they say, oh, this guy jumped in now, why can't you gank him? He's all-inning me, why can't you gank him? He doesn't know where you are, why you're not here? I've seen that many times in the past, and I think sometimes when you are switching the same role over and over, in our case we switched jungle 3 times, and that's the only thing we've been switching. I also had to take this look at our team and what I do. Am I making junglers worse in our team because of my approach? And I realized that from my personal perspective, that I set a very unrealistic expectation on junglers because they have to play in a way which is absolutely perfect, otherwise it won't work. And that's the mindset everyone in the team was, because everyone was pulling the jungler all the time. Bot lane was pulling the jungler, mid was pulling the top was putting the jungler. And whenever the jungler was slightly behind, the game was just fucking over because no one ever backed down. And I realized that was a fault in my approach. It wasn't necessarily a player or someone that did something wrong, because I can sing the praise of the player. Sometimes the mindset of how you want a specific role to act in a team can be wrong. And maybe this is something that TSM, I have no clue. Maybe this is something they need to address, because the tendency is there, right?
There was a stat on Twitter that Empire said, which was that since Bjergsen joined in 2014, they've had 8 different starting junglers. 8. That's fucking a lot, boys.
So let's put it into context. So they had 8 junglers for 6 years.
Right, that's not how maths works, but I don't know what your fucking brain
What
works.
do you mean?
So Bjergsen joined in 2014. Is it 2020 now?
Oh shit! Oh wait, my bad. What is it? Oh, the thing I was trying to do was they had 8 junglers in the last they had 8 junglers in the history of TSM. Oh yeah. Okay. Never mind.
I don't know what that means either, but whatever. Yeah, yes, Loco. You said
I understand the name of the show.
Never mind. Fuck.
No, the reason we named the show that is because I'm trying to get people to fucking listen to him. No one will. Thus far, the search goes on. Yeah, exactly. I am. In a way. Yeah, in a way.
Shit. Oh my god.
Trying to help those less.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I see that with all of the shows that you do, Thorin. You're such a great guy, man.
I'm like Bernie Sanders. I'm rich as fuck. Now I'm just trying to share with everyone else.
Oh my god.
Right, end on that note. That's the end of the show. Thanks, everyone. Peace out.
Yamato, any final words? Thank you so much for being on the show, by the way.
Final words. Thank you for having me. It was fun. It's very late. I've been up 8 in the morning. Final words. Just Vitality fans, keep cheering for us. Keep watching. Listen Loco with Thorin. I have no problems with Locodoco. I just expressed my opinion about the shit he tried to pull on fucking TSM Legends and in the Team Liquid video. I'm just expressing based on what I saw. I have no hate towards any man, person or living being that doesn't exist in my house. So I'll end with that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll see you guys later.
Peace. Peace.
Thank you so much to our Patreon supporters, and especially thank you to our gold Patreon supporter, BeltPounder420, Tobias Bernasconi, and Icelandic C9 fan. And thank you to everyone that supports the show, the Twitch subs, the other Patreon supporters, and even just like the viewers. Like, without you guys, the show wouldn't be possible. And yeah, I mean, it's my favorite part of the day.